And welcome back to Tektite 2020, Women of Sea and Space. We're kicking off now with session 9, the Age of Aquarius. In 1970, the all-female team of the Aquanauts of Tektite II Mission 6 lived and worked underwater for 10 days in Lameshur Bay in the Virgin Islands. Today, the only operational underwater saturation habitat laboratory is at the Aquarius Reefbase Habitat, managed by the Florida Institute of Technology in the United States. In this particular session, we're going to be joined by seasoned female aquanauts and astronauts and their teams discussing human factors research, technology readiness pathways, the systems that have been refined over decades to enable activities to occur at multiple sites across several missions, with teams including the panelists that were here today. The work of these ladies is contributing to multiple aspects of mission readiness for space. But additionally, their research is contributing to the science and awareness of the ocean domain itself. They're also contributing to things like human factors. This Earth-space analog simulation develops tools and processes. Our first speaker is Professor Shirley Pomponi. She is an associate professor, she's a research professor at Florida Atlantic University. She works with the University Harbor Branch Oceanic Institute, and she's the former executive director of the Cooperative Institute for Ocean Exploration, Research and Technology. She has also been living and working underwater as part of an Aquarius or Nemo mission with NASA scientists. We look forward to hearing more about her work from the great depths to even shallower depths with Aquarius. Hi, Dr. Pomponi.
Thanks, Sarah Jane, and thanks everyone for joining. I want to just start by congratulating the Tektite divers, the Tektite Aquanauts, celebrating 50th anniversary of that important and historic mission. So I recently, about a year ago, had the really tremendous opportunity to live for 9 days underwater in the Aquarius underwater habitat in the Florida Keys, which is operated by Florida International University, part of our state university system here in Florida. I'd like to just start, though, by just talking a little bit about how I got to live underwater for 9 fabulous days. And it all started, I guess, probably about, let's see, let me pull up my share screen here, and hopefully we can see that. Can you see that? Oh, all right, are you able to see? Yeah, I think so, but you're seeing all my notes as well, is that correct? Let's see if I can, let me just stop that and see what happens here. Let's try it again. It just worked before. Hold on a second. Share screen. Bring it down here. Okay, how about now? Can you see okay? We just tested this about 10 minutes ago and it worked just fine.
That's okay, Shirley. Technology sometimes doesn't cooperate.
We just did this.
Try that share again, Shirley. I don't see it. All right,
I'm going to try it again. Let's try it again. Share. Okay. Let me see. Okay, hold on a sec. Let me see if I can get this. Okay. Okay, how about now?
You can still see the speaker view.
Okay, and I don't know how to get rid of that. A slideshow. How about now?
Now we've lost the vision.
Okay, well, let's see. Let's try this one more time. Seriously, we just tried this a few minutes ago and it worked.
The system, it looks really intuitive, but there There are
No,
some
but I mean,
glitches.
we actually did this and it worked, so I'm not sure what to show you.
Oh, yes.
Window.
When we're sharing
Okay.
screen, make sure you're sharing through the app. So click share screen, and instead of your entire screen, click the one to the right of that, which says application window, or
Okay.
if Chrome tab.
All right. I think Chrome tab is probably going to be the best. Let's try that.
Okay.
That doesn't look like it's working either.
Choose the middle one, Shirley, the application window.
Okay. Application window, share screen, application window. And hold on a sec. I think we might try that. I think that might work. Now it's still seeing the notes. Well, that's okay. I don't mind if you see my notes. It's okay. You can
We're
see what's
clear on
coming
this end, Shirley. It's full screen for us.
Okay, terrific. Okay, sorry for that. Okay, so I just want to, I'll try and make up some time here. Start by how this adventure all started for me. So I had the incredible good fortune about 35 years ago to be invited to take part in an expedition and actually join a research group at Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institution, which was a separate private research institute at that time. We only became part of Florida Atlantic University about, I guess, 12 or 13 years ago. What was really cool, besides the fact that I was living in Pennsylvania at the time and it was December and freezing cold, and that I got to go to the Bahamas and dive in this amazing submersible, was that it really opened up a whole new avenue of research for me. So I was able to participate in a multidisciplinary research group focused on discovering chemicals that are produced by marine organisms and that can be used to develop drugs to treat diseases like cancer and infectious diseases and so on. So we got to dive, and this was actually the start of probably about 25 years of making dives, more than 300 dives in the Johnson Sea Link manned submersible. Could go down to about 1,000 meters, so not full ocean depth by any stretch of the imagination. But we were really focused on looking at trying to discover chemicals that are produced by marine organisms. Nature is the source of a lot of important medicines. You're familiar with many of these, but the ocean supports a large diversity of life and ecosystems, and that biological diversity forms the basis for discovering some novel chemicals and novel biological activities. So just so you know, there are a couple of examples of clinically available drugs that are derived from marine organisms. One of them is what's used for cold sores, for herpes infections, called Zovirax, and it came from a shallow water sponge just off the coast of Florida. Another is a drug that's used to treat soft tissue sarcoma. It's called Yondelis, and it came, again, from a shallow water marine organism, an actinidicidian sea squirt tunicate. And then there are other products that are commercially available that are that have compounds in them or extracts in them that are derived from marine organisms. Probably one that many of you might be familiar with, or the Estee Lauder line of cosmetics, Resilience Cosmetics. It has an anti-inflammatory chemical in there that's derived from a gorgonian. So there are thousands of these marine-derived chemicals that have been discovered since the mid-20th century. And my focus is on sponges. That's my area of expertise. And there have been, the sponges, in fact, are the most prolific source of these chemicals. The sponges produce thousands of compounds. We know way more about what they do in human cancer cells or human diseases than what they do for the sponge itself. So it could be to deter predation, prevent things from growing over top of them. Sponges are attached to the bottom for their adult life, so it might be to send signals, chemical cues to other individuals of the same species, to protect themselves from UV radiation. And more recently, it's been discovered that some of the compounds or the components of sponges, like collagen and silica, can be used for regenerative medicine, so for bone and dental implants. So it's really a fascinating area of research now. This is one sponge that we discovered in the Gulf of Mexico. It turns out to be a fairly common sponge in deeper water throughout the Atlantic and Gulf. It's called Afrocallistes beatrix. It's a glass sponge, and it's the source of a chemical called the afrocallistins that are active against a very virulent form of cancer called triple negative breast cancer. Not virulent, but it's a one that's very difficult to treat. Okay, so let's fast forward, because I got to do lots of these dives in the Johnson Sealing sub. But if you want to go deeper and deeper and deeper, being able to go in a human-occupied vehicle, unless you're lucky to be in the group that got to dive recently in the five deeps in the ocean, most of that deep water work and exploration is done with remotely operated vehicles. And I had the opportunity 3 years ago to participate in an expedition, a telepresence-enabled expedition to the Mariana Trench. And the way that works is that there's a remotely operated vehicle that's tethered to the ship. In this case, it was the NOAA vessel, Oceanus Explorer. And then that by satellite, what we're seeing, what the ROV is capturing on videos in real time, what we're seeing in real time is beamed back to an exploration command center, their mission control at the University of Rhode Island. And this is all supported by the NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research. So I was very, very fortunate to check off one of the things on my bucket list, which is to dive in the Mariana Trench. And we did it, of course, through using the Deep Discoverer ROV. Got to see really some very, very amazing organisms. And of course, because sponges are my specialty, one of the things I was most interested in was seeing some of these really novel sponges that, well, perhaps no one's ever seen before. This one is really, really tiny. It's probably about no more than probably 1 to 2 centimeters across. And it's a particularly interesting sponge, and it's a carnivorous sponge. So instead of filtering out its food from seawater, it actually captures, I don't know if you can see it kind of at the 4 o'clock position, little crustaceans on the surface, and it kind of gobbles them up. The cells surround what it's captured, and they basically digest their prey. So it's really odd for a sponge to be carnivorous, but it turns out there are quite a few of them in the deep sea. Okay, so again, fast forward to about a year ago, actually a couple years ago, we started planning this, and I was invited to do another thing on my bucket list, which was to do a saturation dive. And I got to dive with it was a crew of 6, so the 4 of us females and 2 of the Aquarius Habitat technicians. You'll see a picture of them in a few minutes. But being someone who's like a real, space junkie, really interested in space exploration, and an astronaut groupie, this was kind of like a trip of a lifetime for me, because I got to spend a few weeks training and then 9 days living with, from left to right, Jessica Watkins, who's a NASA astronaut. And then next to me is Samantha Cristoforetti, an astronaut from the European Space Agency, who spent quite a bit of time, in fact, held a record for a while for the longest time in the International Space Station, held the record for a woman staying the longest time in the International Space Station until that record was broken, I think, a couple years ago. And then Chilla Ari from University of South Florida. And Chilla is a neuroscientist and a marine biologist as well. So my role on this in the Nemo mission was to test a few science objectives. So one of them was to look at bioerosion of coral skeletons by sponges. And you may have heard in an earlier panel from one of the Tektite Aquanauts and colleague and friend, Alina Smont, who, with Rob Whitehead at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington, developed this instrument called the KISME, Coral In Situ Metabolic, I forget what the E stands for, and it measures metabolism of corals in situ. But it's never been used on anything other than corals. So I wanted to test it on sponges, and Alina and Rob Whitehead and I worked to get this adapted so we could test it on sponges. And this was the sponge that we worked with. It's a sponge called Cliona deletrix. It bioerodes coral skeletons by kind of secreting kind of an acidic material. Okay, so why would this be important to do? And why would this be important to do on Nemo? So these excavating sponges bore into coral skeletons, and they make really extensive cavities, and they weaken their structure. So with changes in ocean chemistry, we all know that coral skeletons are going to be weakened, but what's going to happen to the sponge? So, because the sponge may be affected as well. So we really wanted to test this technology in situ. And why Nemo? Because this KISME unit is very similar to tools that are being developed for exploration of planetary geology. A second objective I wanted to test had to do with sponge reproduction. And what you're seeing here is a picture of a sponge that has released strings of eggs. And it's pretty cool if you're lucky enough to be able to catch it. So again, why Nemo? Being able to observe sponge spawning is really serendipitous. You have to be there when it's happening. So if you're not making your dive right around the time that these sponges are spawning, you're going to miss it. So Nemo really offered a unique opportunity to observe spawning. And this is just another picture of a sponge that those of you who dive on the Florida Reef Track, you'll know these giant barrel sponges. And if you dive around now, or kind of like right after the full moon in July and in August, you might actually see this happening. Okay, so we made it down to Nemo. This is the crew, I guess, going counterclockwise. I'm up in the upper left, and then Jessica Watkins, and then Chilla over to the lower right, and Samantha in the upper right, and then our two Aquarius techs were inside watching to make sure we didn't kill ourselves. So what was really cool about this mission was that there were a lot of, it's an animal, and I think Shauna explained this earlier, and I think she'll probably go into a little bit more detail when she does her presentation in a few minutes. It's an analog for planetary exploration. And so there are lots of different things that we use, technologies that we use, procedures, processes that we used that will be or are being used on the space station, or will be further developed to use for planetary exploration. This is just a picture of me actually using a tool that was developed called Playbook that basically marches along every minute, little by little, making sure that all of us are on track doing what we're supposed to be doing. And I'm also wearing a little contraption that was being tested to see if we could kind of like see where we are in space and time as well. That was developed by Draper Industries. And just like for space missions, there's a mission control. And this was mission control back at the Aquarius base on Tavernier, with the crew back there communicating with us as well. This is a photograph of, I think it's Jessica. I know it's Jessica kind of on the right-hand side, and I think it was Chilla maybe on the left. Anyway, this is a photo of them actually using the KISME units in situ, and being able to test that technology. They did an amazing job running this technology. It had never been used at that depth before, so this was a real test for the technology as well. Oh, and here's a picture of me really struggling to do one of the experiments that we had to test our motor skills to see how we were doing under, I guess, the stress of being in saturation. How well we could perform, how quickly we could perform, how accurate we could perform. This was not one of my, and you had to do it with your dominant and non-dominant hands. This was not one of my better tests. My absolute favorite one, though, I have to say, was one that I had to practice a lunar landing, kind of like a lunar landing module thing, which I could not do at all when we did it back at the Johnson Space Center. But for some reason, when we were in the habitat, I was totally focused and I aced it every time. And that was probably my most favorite thing to do. But my second most favorite thing to do was to use a scanning electron microscope, which is this really tiny, kind of like smaller than a microwave. And we were able to use that in the habitat. And in fact, there's one of these scanning electron microscopes called a MOCHI up on the space station right now. I'm just going to finish by because I know we'll have a chance to talk about this a little bit at the end. I'm a firm believer in exploration, whether it's planetary exploration or ocean exploration. The ocean is Earth's final frontier. They cover more than 70% of the surface, 95% of living space where we can live. And we've only explored about 5% of Earth's ocean. So virtual exploration has the potential to increase the pace and scope of exploration and discovery. And with that, I will stop sharing.
That's fantastic, Shirley. Thank you so much. It's really comprehensive and it's amazing. And I see the value in being there for these opportunities, particularly the coral spawning and things like that. As an Australian with the Great Barrier Reef, that would just be magical.
Yeah.
Yes. I do have a question. Did you get to see it when you were at Aquarius Reef? Could you record the photo?
Yeah, no. So I will tell you what happened. I'm going to be like full disclosure. The week before when we were actually out diving, I did actually see some spawning occurring, but then the mission was delayed a few days, and so by then it had passed. So it happens like in a really narrow window of time. There's what's called synchronous spawning, and
yes.
And like I said, you have to be there, and it can be at nighttime as well. So yeah.
Well, let's hope you get to go back again. I believe Nemo 23 was the last mission that has been held at Aquarius, yes?
Yeah, it's true. Well, there was supposed to be one this summer, but because of the pandemic, that's been postponed. So I think that'll happen hopefully next year.
Yes, great. Well, please stay around. We look forward to chatting with you further. And thank you. And our next speaker has also worked at Aquarius Reefbase, but she has done so from a very different perspective. She's actually worked on a citizen scientist or a commercial mission, if you like. Dr. Grace Calvert-Young is an aquanaut. She's also an engineer, an avid sailor, a diver, a National Geographic explorer, and what I always love to say, she is the dancing aquanaut. She has a background in ballet, but she got the chance to work with Fabien Cousteau on Mission 31. Grace, welcome. It's lovely for you to join us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm personally very grateful for the original women of the Tektite mission. I think directly because of them, Liz and I, the two female aquanauts on Mission 31, we could focus on our science and outreach and not be bombarded with questions or doubts about whether or not females could be aquanauts. And that's because Sylvia and her team of others, they've fought those battles for us. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful. I'm also really psyched to be here today too, because I've gotten used to speaking to kids and non-ocean audiences. And for them, my message is to be excited about the ocean, that the ocean is amazing, that it's full of opportunity. And yet I know this crew, this audience is not 100% on board. You all are already in really deep. And I love that. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion and getting to go into a bit more detail of the mission more than I usually do. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So here's one of my favorite photos of the Aquarius habitat. And here's just a couple photos of our daily activities while we were living underwater as part of Mission 31. So I was one of 9 aquanauts on Mission 31, which was a mission led by Fabien Cousteau to commemorate the 50th anniversary of his grandfather, Jacques Cousteau, living underwater on Conshelf 2. And while living in Aquarius, we ran half a dozen experiments for graduate students at Northeastern University. Those ranged from collecting samples of sponges for DNA analysis to setting out plankton nets in morning and dusk so that we would collect samples, and then a researcher was looking at how community composition changed throughout the day. We set out column samplers to detect traces of pollutants in the water, including oil. And there was a huge outreach component. We led daily Skype in the classroom sessions with students all over the globe. One of those classrooms was our very own Joe Grabowski, too. So thank you, Joe. It's been funny because I find adults are often shocked to hear that this habitat exists. But kids are not surprised, especially recently, because they've been watching the show Octonauts. Octonauts is a cartoon where animals live and work underwater. I've noticed kids' questions changing quite a bit too in the last few years since Octonauts has become more popular. At first, when I talked to little ones, their questions were, their questions quickly devolved into an obsession with sharks. They would be, are you scared of sharks? What if a shark did this? What if a shark did that? At one point to kindergartners, I was explaining how air is supplied to our helmets through an umbilical hose. And then a student asked, well, what if a shark came in and ate part of that hose? Like, what would you do? And I said, well, we have an emergency air cylinder on our back, so we'd be fine. And then it was, oh, well, what if a shark did this and that? And so finally, at one point I said to them, I said, look, a shark really wouldn't attack me unless I looked like a turtle underwater. And then a kid said, oh, then you better not wear your Ninja Turtle costume underwater. Like, yeah, okay. But so that was in 2013 and 14. The mission was in 2014. And the show Octonauts has gotten a lot more popular since then. And recently when I've talked to little kids, I've gotten the most amazing questions. Like, have you seen a mannequin shrimp? Did you know that octopus have 3 hearts? Some of them built mini Aquariuses out of Legos or out of soda bottles that they put underwater. And some teachers, after I've told to the teachers, I'm like, hey, your kids really know their stuff. And they've explained that they think part of it's because of Octonauts, but also a bunch of them are part of Joe's program and part of some of the National Geographic expedition programs that I have done a fantastic job of educating students about the wonders of our ocean and this incredible underwater habitat. I think after watching Octonauts too, they'll be sad when they learn Aquarius is the last of these habitats left, and they're going to wonder why that is, and hopefully build and work on more. So, oh, one sec, I need to get it. So this photo shows one of my favorite moments from our mission on Aquarius. I was there in part because I helped adapt an ultra high-speed camera to the underwater environment. Our human eyes see at about 30 frames a second, and the slow motion setting on an iPhone is about 120 frames per second. And this camera could film at up to 18,000 frames per second. It was invented by another MIT alum who's now just around the corner from me in California. And he named it after a famous MIT professor named Doc Edgerton, who worked with Jacques Cousteau back in the day. And I think of that story, how it all came full circle, and I wonder if they ever imagined that derivatives of their work and their technology would come full circle decades later in their grandchildren's generation. So there's the camera up close. And what this did was it let us see things that move faster than the human eye can detect. It let us film them in ultra slow motion. And it was the first time that we could see marine creatures moving super fast in their natural environment. This photo I think is funny too, because I'm there upside down, which looks funny and looks uncomfortable, but I think many of the women here can relate. It was actually very comfortable to stand like that because the helmets are pretty heavy, even underwater. And we were diving for hours and hours a day. And so my shoulders would get a little tired. So I would give myself a break maybe every hour or so for a minute and just let my head do the natural thing and just fall to the sea floor. And then with the neoprene wetsuits, my legs would float up. So I let myself take this 30-second break. I'm upside down and I was staring at a patch of sand for 30 seconds before I realized I was staring eye to eye at this beautifully camouflaged mantis shrimp. Here's the shrimp here, and this shrimp's only about the diameter of, say, a quarter. And you can see it's very well camouflaged in the sand, so I didn't notice it until staring at it for a long time. These are fascinating creatures, and they're famous for moving really, really fast. So with that underwater camera, we took the opportunity to film it in really slow motion. And here is one of my favorite moments that we caught. So this is about 2,000 frames a second. Yeah. And you can get a sense for how slow it is. You see the sand moving around the mantis shrimp. It's really slow. And in real time, watching this in real time, I had no idea that the mantis even fed. I sort of saw a blip in the sand and didn't know what happened. It wasn't until getting back to the habitat later and reviewing the footage that I realized we'd caught this incredible moment. I've watched this video hundreds of times, and it's fascinating to see those the mantis's two eyes on its stalks focus in on the prey and then leap out at just the perfect moment. This creature moves faster than a bullet comes out of a gun, and only with this camera were we able to capture this motion. Here's another one of my favorite bits of footage we saw. I'm going to play that again. This was in real time. I saw on the seafloor, it looked like a ghost was walking on the seafloor. I just saw a poof of sand. It's calmed down. And then a little bit ahead, I'd see another poof of sand. And I thought, what is that? And we got the camera, brought it over there. And then again, only after watching this footage did I realize it's this very well camouflaged lizardfish. And it buries itself in the sand. And then in a lightning second, it sneaks its body into two S shapes and zooms into its next hiding position. Now I'm going to show every day while in the habitat, we made video diaries. We had an amazing topside support crew, including filmmakers and documentary producers, and they helped us put these clips together. So I'm going to show this 2-minute segment that gives a bit more detail about the work we did with the camera. Let me know if there's no sound.
We took the Age of Aquarius out tonight. Yeah, we actually just got back to the dive, hence the wet hair, and it went really well. It took us about maybe 45 minutes to set up the camera. We're using a lens that has a really narrow focus, so we can see the details of these little critters, and we're shooting at 1,500 frames per second, and so the screen we're looking at is really small.
We actually have been communicating with somebody inside the Aquarius habitat who is, usually it's Fabian.
No, don't move the camera. Just let me know when he spits so I can push the trigger.
Okay, I'll let you know.
But after 45 minutes, we got it.
Can you see the little grains of sand in focus?
I think only 29 of the 42 grains are actually in focus. Maybe we should try that again.
And then for 45 minutes, we played with the mantis shrimp. We caught it feeding.
And the mantis shrimp was so fast, we didn't even see it.
Yeah, there's a lot of other things here on the reef we can film because there's a lot of critters that just move really fast, and only with the camera can we see the details of their movements. And this is really important to understand for people who study the mantis shrimp and these fish that move fast, but also as with someone with an engineering background, I'm just fascinated about how these creatures can mechanically move so fast and navigate in the water.
So it was a pretty good day and all. Really great day. High five.
Yeah.
That was lame.
That was super lame.
Okay. Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
We originally brought this camera down to Aquarius because we wanted to investigate this unproven theory about the Goliath grouper, which is the fish you see here in this photo. They're like 300, 200-pound fish. So, I mean, you couldn't hug one if you wanted to. And this is Liz, my buddy Aquanaut, just staring eye to eye with the Goliath grouper. And divers and other Aquarius aquanauts have reported feeling a boom in their chest when the grouper feeds near them. And one theory is that the grouper is making a cavitation bubble in its mouth, and it might do that to stun its prey. So this bubble would form in an instant, too fast for the human eye to see. And we were wondering if we could potentially film that event with this ultra high-speed camera. And it took days to have the grouper be comfortable enough around us until this moment happened where Liz was staring at the grouper for, like 20 minutes. And it did boom right in front of her just a few minutes after this photo was taken. And so we were there and we had the camera, but we realized we'd have to get the camera like in the fish's mouth. And so it didn't work for this intended purpose, but that just goes to show you a lot of science happens in somewhat unexpected ways. A special thing and unique thing about this mission is that we had visitors nearly every day. We affectionately called them the unsaturated. We had journalists, artists, and media personalities coming down to visit. This is Adrian Grenier, actor from Entourage, and now the founder of the Lonely Whale Foundation. He came and visited Fabian, and then tweeted about his experience with the hashtag Science is Sexy. So that was a big deal. And here's another special moment at one of the viewports. This is from the crew before us.
Oh, did you see that? Oh my God! Right in the window. Look right in the window. There's the shark. Did you get it? Come back. He's coming right at us. Oh, did you see that? Oh my God! Right in the window. Look right in the window. There's the shark. Did you get it? Oh, did you see that? Oh my God!
I'm curious in the comments if anyone caught the name of the grouper there. And I'll end here. Several folks in this audience and who put together this amazing panel are artists themselves. Isn't that an odd or maybe not so odd coincidence? I was a ballet dancer, as Sarah mentioned, and I'll end with this video where I got to connect it all together doing ballet on top of the emergency air supply cylinders just outside of Aquarius. Yeah, thanks all.
That was so beautiful. I have a quick question relating to time. You're not only capturing this really interesting, all of the interesting phenomena with these cameras, but you're also working with quick, slow. You're speeding things up and you're capturing slowly. So tell me about how that translates to the body. When you're moving and performing underwater, what is happening to your sense of time perception then?
Ooh, well, being a dancer, I know how hard it is sometimes to move fast and to keep up with certain type of music and tempos. And yet we're moving at a speed that humans can see and process. With this camera, it impressed me because so many of these underwater organisms, they're moving just way faster for us to process. So if I was watching a ballet that the mantis shrimp put together, it would probably happen in the blink of an eye. I wouldn't be able to fully appreciate it at all because I don't have the right sensory system for it. So that gave me a huge appreciation for how we perceive the world. differently and in a limited way because of our senses. And I see that as a nice way where technology can help us understand the ocean floor. Yeah, I can think of a lot too. Maybe we'll touch on them in the panel.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, it's a lovely segue, and it does link back to the Tektite II Mission 6 work, where they too were looking at observing fish in their natural behaviour and looking at fish that were being startled and things like that, and trying to capture those minute moments without this kind of technology. So it's great to see where it's come. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker has also been at Aquarius Reefbase, but for a very particular reason. She too, so we've heard from a scientist and an engineer, and now we're going to talk to a physician. It is a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Shawna Pandya. She's an aquanaut, a dive medical technician, a skydiver. She's a citizen scientist, and she's training for suborbital spaceflight with Project Possum. Welcome, Shauna. And we're looking forward to hearing your particular engagement with Aquarius Reef.
Thank you so much. I am just going to go ahead and share my screen as soon as that menu becomes available. And then we will go on a whirlwind tour of medical payloads at Aquarius. Just give me 2 shakes here. Doesn't seem to be popping up. Came up earlier. All right, so for some reason, although I shared my screen earlier today, technology has evolved on us, or devolved, depending on the case. So I am going to go ahead without my slides for now, but I don't think you need them, because we're going to have a pretty fun discussion about what exactly it means to live life at Aquarius from a research and medical research perspective. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Shawna Pandya. I am a Canadian physician, scientist, astronaut candidate, and aquanaut, as Sarah Jane said. I was at Aquarius Reefbase last year with the World Extreme Medicine Organization, getting my dive medical technician training, and holy cow, it was a treat. And since then, I've gone on to do a lot with analog environments and medical payloads. So what I want you to keep in mind as we go through this chat is this will be a whirlwind tour. We're going to compress years of medical payloads into about 5 to 7 minutes. So buckle up, it will be quick. When you think about Aquarius Reefbase, I also want you to keep in mind the image of the International Space Station, because we're going to speak specifically about the value of ARB in the context of its value for human spaceflight. So for those of you who don't know, Aquarius Reefbase is where NASA's Nemo missions, which stands for, as we love acronyms in the space world, NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations, missions are held. So as our previous speakers have alluded to, crews are sent down for 8 to 18 days at a time, whereupon we study various aspects of physiology, basic science, technology demonstrations, and crew dynamics. So the reason we like Aquarius in particular as an analog environment, and when I talk about analog environments, I speak specifically about something that is analogous to the spaceflight environment. And so what we like about Aquarius Reefbase is that it is high fidelity, in that it is remote, it's resource limited, it's isolated and confined. And perhaps one of the greatest advantages of being and living at ARB is the saturation dive environment. Because once we're in saturation, to evacuate to the surface requires 15-hour and 47-minute decompression time. So for comparison, on the International Space Station, we have the luxury of evacuating in as little as 3.5 hours if we need to. So you can be closer to the surface at ARB than you would on the ISS, but still have less access to the surface. So it's an entirely contained system. The power, the comms, air supply is fed to this habitat 50 feet underwater by a life support buoy just above ARB. It's a compressed habitat for up to 6 divers in a confined space consisting of a wet porch, a wet bench area, the common working lab and kitchen area, and then the crew quarters. I'm just going to pause here and see if something has changed, if in case I can share my graphics, but it doesn't look like anything has. So we will plug away. So we've talked about the value of Nemo as an analog for spaceflight. So let's look at the history of what has previously been studied there from a medical perspective. Well, basically, if you can name a bodily system or an aspect of clinical medicine, it has probably been studied at Nemo. So Nicole Stott is on this call, retired NASA astronaut. During her Nemo 9 mission, there was one of my favorite payloads because of the Canadian connection. Dr. Mbari, a minimally invasive surgeon from McMaster University in Canada, managed to perform telesurgery with a communications delay of 2 seconds, simulating what that delay might look like on the moon from a dry and comfortable place at McMaster University. Additional payloads at Nemo have consisted of vestibular function testing, telemedicine and telemonitoring, sleep studies that have eventually gone on to fly on ISS, and in basic science studies, including telomere and telomerase studies, as well as polysomnography studies. So looking at variations in stages of sleep as they relate to body temperature, hormone production as a factor of the environment. So this has been a whirlwind tour. And then the last payload I want to talk about before talking about the value of such an environment for spaceflight is the deployment of emerging technologies like HoloLens for augmented reality to apply to just-in-time training in case of a medical emergency, like an appendicitis. This has been done at Nemo in the past. So taking a step back, why do we care? Well, space is hard, space is expensive, space is high risk. So when we talk about preparing for space and packing for space, particularly from a medical perspective, I like to think about and call it the Aladdin principle of space. Infinite cosmic power to get there, itty bitty living space. This is also sometimes called the backpack principle. So when we pack our backpack on a camping trip or a trip to space, every single thing that we put in our backpack takes up space. That means when we're putting in one thing, we're taking up space for something else that might be of use. And everything we do is a trade-off. So when we're packing for space, everything we bring for us, from a medical perspective, needs to be low cost, low volume, low mass, low power, easy to use, and hardy to the elements. In addition to that, space is hostile. The microgravity, high radiation, altered circadian rhythm, that is altered day-night cycles, and confinement of being in close quarters adds to the physiological stress of being in this environment. So that's all a very fancy way of saying space is trying to kill you. How do we prepare for space? Well, the key drivers to preparing ourselves for space, particularly from a medical perspective, come down to prevention, risk identification and mitigation, as well as designing in terms of the constraints we just identified. We additionally use our best medical modeling. NASA uses the integrated medical model to look at the risks of what might happen. It's risks to the loss of crew life as well as loss of mission objectives, and then translates that clinically into what is most likely to happen from a clinical perspective, generating a list of the exploration medical capabilities, most likely medical conditions. So translating that into space, we said space is hard, space is expensive. The first time we employ our medical capabilities or run into a medical emergency in space, we don't want it to be the first time. We want to have practiced our medical procedures, our training, as well as the alterations in physiology that can occur by having practiced in an analog or isolated and confined environment, ideally before we have gone to space. That's why we care about the value of analogs, such as Aquarius Reefbase. Because if we're planning to go to ISS and low Earth orbit, the moon and beyond, we want to be as prepared as possible. We want to practice those time delays at 2 to 3 seconds for the moon, up to 48 minutes round way from Mars. And we want to know what exactly can go wrong before it does. So I think I'm out of time now, but that has been a whirlwind introduction to medical payloads at ARB, why we care about them, and how they translate to the spaceflight environment. And I look forward to sharing the panel with all of these amazing speakers.
Thank you so much, and thank you for a great recovery. I know it's a little bit disorienting when you don't have your visual material, but you certainly had us imagine and conceive of, you know, really many complex things and to understand why they're in place. In addition to preparing for space flight, there are more than 2,000 people living or working underwater at any one time around the world. And there are many of those people working in saturation. So the work that you do, whether it's hyperbaric medicine or remote and extreme medicine, is not only servicing the work of people who prepare to go into space, but also the people whose daily lives depend on interaction in these high-risk operational environments. So it's great work, and it's a great utilization of the Aquarius Reef Base, as you say, as a way for understanding and developing those tools. So please stick around. We've worked out why your slides didn't play, and potentially, if we need to, we can draw those back up later. Thanks, Shauna. It's my pleasure to also call back another speaker that we've heard through who through the last 2 days, who is doing parallel work both underwater and in space. This person is one of our favorites. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nicole, astronaut Nicole Stott. She's an engineer, she's a retired astronaut with NASA. She has also turned her passions and her work towards artistry, and she's the founder of the Space for Art Foundation. She also served as a Nemo crew member on Nemo 9 mission at the Aquarius Reef Habitat, and her perspective of sea and space is quite unique. Nicole, thank you for joining us. Hello.
Hi, it's great to be back, and thanks for, I guess I did okay yesterday. You didn't shut me down for today, so that's good.
No, we're very pleased to have you back.
All right, my pleasure, and I'm so happy to have heard the three speakers before me. It's, you know, Aquarius and the opportunity, you know, I can tell you, I highly recommend both the go live and work in space and the live and work undersea, and the parallels are quite amazing. Very thankful for that opportunity. I'm going to share my screen now and see if I can make it work the first time, unlike yesterday. How's that? All right. Okay, so I'm going to speak today to a little bit, I think, more from just the personal experience that I had and how that paralleled what I also experienced with spaceflight. And I'll start with this slide. It's just kind of a montage of crew photos. And I included a couple different ones. The one in the top left is our whole team. And like any space mission, it's not just the 4 or the 6 people that are on the spacecraft that are the crew. At least that's the way I look at it. It's like you've got people in different places doing very important things, and very thankful to those folks on the back of that boat as we were about to get ready to go deploy to splash down. And just an assortment of pictures of the crew from the time we had back in, I can't even believe it now, back in, I'm sorry, that's a lie. I put 2016 there, 2006. We spent 18 days living at 60 feet underwater on the Aquarius habitat. And just like our spaceflight missions, we created a patch and we actually created a little mantra to go along with our mission, which was exploration from the bottom up. And some people thought that was funny, but we thought it was exactly what we were doing. For me, I think we all, it's funny what we can discover when we are challenge ourselves in ways that are a little bit uncomfortable. And I can tell you, I had been a recreational diver for years before training for the Nemo mission. I had done the stuff in the pool at the Neutral Buoyancy Lab for what we had to do for spacewalk training, to be able to be certified to work in that pool. But the Nemo dive training was pretty extensive, pretty advanced. And as what I would call a comfortable recreational diver, I didn't want my mask off. I didn't want somebody messing with my regulator, none of that. And most of our time in the week of training in advance of our mission was all of that kind of thing. So I had to do a lot to both physically and mentally prepare before I got down to Key Largo to start that training. So I trusted people at the Neutral Buoyancy Lab to help me learn how to swim better and use my dive equipment better, and essentially do a lot of those advanced things before getting there so that I didn't freak out when I was at 60 feet below with our trainers. And so it took a lot for me to get from that top left picture to being comfortable in that right side picture, and then, doing these line searches and mask off activities that we had to do before going into the mission. Whenever I look at pictures from our Nemo mission, I am immediately reminded of similar experiences in space. I love the picture on the left because, in the water, we can move in any way. We're comfortable pretty much in any direction, except for, maybe staying on your head for too long, because here the blood does flow in that way. But just the feel and the visual of it is very, very familiar. Comparisons to what we did as spacewalks. And for Nemo 9, we were at the point, which I believe started, and Shauna, you might be able to tell me better, but believe started back with about the Nemo 7 mission, where we were working really, really hard to make sure that any tasks we did as part of the mission were strategic. They were part of what NASA's strategic plan was for going back to the moon and onto Mars, surface exploration related activities, as well as the in-habitat science that was happening. And on Nemo 9, we were still using the big dual tank cave rigs and doing a lot of scuba that way, further excursions away from the habitat, as well as the helmet-based and umbilical system to be able to walk around on the surface and do that kind of activity. And we spent a lot of time with these kind of human and robotic interface activities that it just parallel so beautifully what we do in space as well. To speak a little bit to those medical investigations that we were doing inside the habitat, the picture on the left is I believe it was the Da Vinci robotic telerobotic system, and that's the one that Dr. Anvari was using to simulate suturing as part of a surgical treatment. And thankfully, that's none of us under that green fabric. That is this fake skin and blood and stuff. I'd never seen it before, but it looked really real. And it was pretty impressive to see how he could manage that with the 2-second delay with his video and controls from Canada. And of course, we were monitoring. We wanted to make sure that Tim still had a brain. He probably had the biggest brain of all of us, so that was good. And all kinds of the same kind of activities that Shauna mentioned, we were doing inside of the habitat as well. One of the things that I think we find as astronauts, for sure, I believe as aquanauts, as crew members, is to we want to share the experience with as many people as we possibly can. And that also includes remembering, those before us who, in some cases, made the greatest sacrifice. And while we were down there, we made sure we took this little lapel pin from the STS-107 mission to remember our friends. And that's the hand of Dr. Dave Williams. He was our commander on the mission, and he, I believe it was on Easter Sunday, went out and and safely stowed this little pin somewhere on the reef for memory of that crew. We also are, just like in space, you know, there's the human side of all of this, and we have holidays while we're in space. We happened in that 18 days to overlap Easter. We were able to communicate with our families, but we tried to share it in kind of a fun way. We had this little stuffed rabbit that we called Scuttle Bunny that Tim deployed on the rover on Easter Sunday and was brought back in. I think that perhaps Bill and Mark might still have this little rabbit somewhere. You know, hanging out in the galley. It just feels good to do that after a long day of diving. And of course, if there's going to be anybody goofy going on, there's Ronnie Guerin with his very favorite scientific journal, reading the latest news. Because we always get the potty question, and quite honestly, it is one of these interesting adventures, whether you're under the water or you're in space. Just a quick shot of the gazebo, what we call the gazebo at Aquarius Reefbase, a really interesting facility. You know, you had to kind of pop out of the wet porch, swim under, and pop your head up in what was kind of like an upturned cup in the water and do your thing. A little bit different on the space station, but I think it's so cool because that's what it's about. It's like part of the adventure. You don't want these places to be exactly the way you experience every other day. You want there to be a little bit of a twist on it. And there is, just like in space, I can tell you the free time for me inside the habitat was spent in front of these beautiful windows, kind of feeling like I was the one on display, honestly. These two beautiful Goliath grouper would come and visit us early in the morning and after sunset as well. And they were ginormous. We actually, as we've heard, everybody I think tends to name them. We named them Stella and Lucy after my two German Shepherd dogs at the time, but really incredible. And that gazebo picture from before, I actually had a pre-dawn encounter with both of these wonderful fish out there one morning. Wish I'd had the camera there too. And I will close just by saying that these vantage points of space, of sea, I mean, they're giving us this understanding both personally and scientifically, this understanding of this planet that we share together. And there's a lot that just, I think, centers on the awe and wonder of it. And I'm very excited about sharing those experiences in that way to get people excited about who and where we are in space together. And I'm especially thankful that after living and working undersea on the Aquarius habitat for 18 days, I'm able to share this undersea experience with my son and my husband, and hope that that Roman, my son, will you know, make an attachment himself to this natural wonder that gives us life. And I will stop sharing. If I can. There we go. All right, how's that? There we go, Sarah Jane.
That was brilliant. Thank you. I love the way, and I love the way you take us in the experience and out of the experience, and how the experience takes you in and out of that as well. There's this beautiful transition that you're always navigating between inner and outer spaces, bigger spaces, and your personal spaces. And it was a lovely family shot to see at the end to continue the journey. One quick question: if you were preparing another mission to go into a place like Aquarius, how do you think you would do things a little bit differently if you know, I remember when the Da Vinci, seeing the Da Vinci system at Louis Pasteur, maybe in 2006, and being so excited to see it at Nemo, because it meant that it was the stepping stone to being able to do what Shauna's talking about in space. But what do you think from a technological or cultural perspective is something that we could start to implement in an Aquarius Reef-based mission in the future that would be a stepping stone?
Well, I love the things that are happening already. I think Shauna mentioned something about, either AR or VR, becoming part of this experience. And that's happening on the station as well, And, imagine you're inside the space station, and I think it just keeps evolving. It's like that to prepare to go out and do an emergency spacewalk. Imagine if you could just have around you, visually and physically be experiencing that outside, scene, kind of in 3 dimensions and floating inside the station before going out. I see that same thing happening undersea, and not just for the science that's going on there, but, and I think some of this is being developed already, but in order for us to share the experience with as many people as possible, to put them, under the sea with us, under the surface of the ocean with us, in that shallow 60 feet and down in that Marianas Trench, all those places.
Yes.
And I think there's the scientific value of it. I think there's the personal relationship that people can make with it. But I also think there's ways to use that allow us to, better ourselves, not have the captive dolphin or orca in the I won't name names but to be able to share this life with people who can't see it otherwise in a very, honest way. And then we should be doing more art down there. I'll just throw that in.
You don't have to convince me. I'm with you there. More art, more expeditionary art and in situ expression, human expression, and cultural exchange.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. Please stand by. We would love to chat further. A completely different perspective from that, but one who sees all, is somebody who would be involved in either a mission control center or a Capcom center. It is my privilege to introduce a fellow Australian, Andrea Boyd, and she's the only Australian who is working at the International Space Station Flight Control Center on Earth. She's based at the European Astronaut Center in Germany. Well, nearby. Andrea has also worked on Nemo missions in the US and has had the privilege or the opportunity to see operations across the globe, both under and outer space. Welcome, Andrea.
Yes, thanks very much. I do not scuba, unlike every other speaker on this panel. I am a life-saving and swimming instructor for 20 years, but I'm terrified of scuba, so I do not dive. But I am your multilingual mission control on the top side. So I'm going to show you a bit more what it's like from the top side. And stand by. Okay, so All right, so I'm gonna take you through a bit. My daily life normally is with the International Space Station. It's the largest thing ever built, and we've got 20 years of human habitation continuously in October this year. It's the closest thing to Starfleet. It's above politics, and it's just the most brilliant place to work in the international team for. There are 5 mission controls, not just Houston like the movies, and at each of those, just one person is allowed to talk on space to ground. So depending on your location, you have a different call sign, and mine is therefore EUROCom in Europe. So when we're in mission control, this is a bit what it looks like for my day job. And and we are the interface, so the representatives of the crew interests and the flight control team, and then representing and interfacing between all of the scientists and engineers in the various mission control sites, back up to the astronauts as well. So a lot of multitasking. Nominally, I'm based in Cologne in Germany, as Sarah mentioned, at the European Astronaut Center, where we have large-scale training facilities as well as the neutral buoyancy facility for training underwater. And I know Jessica and Nicole in particular are very familiar with the Columbus module in the back right of this picture, where we train the crew as operators and as specialists on the European systems, and previously also on the ATV that you can see in the foreground. So my involvement with Nemo, I was topside for Nemo 22. Inside the Aquarius Reefbase, this is a nice cross-section, so you can see the construction of what various speakers were showing before, the triple bunk beds, and then sort of the living area, and the wet porch where you can enter and exit Aquarius. It's actually really cool because the pressure inside is the same as the pressure outside, so I'm sure it's been mentioned, but it's really cool that you don't have to do anything particular. The water just, you know, stays there and you can go in and out. The top side, this is what it looks like. You come into the building and there's a common area, and then at the back there's sort of the dive prep area, and to the left is the mission control. This is what it looks like after we cleaned up a bit, to be honest, because we had a lot of equipment at the beginning and all the different experiments, and then they were all potted down, and this is what it looks like when we were setting up for the mission. So before the mission, you know, we all come together. We've got a big team briefing with everybody, and really, you know, all get on the same page. We've all got our different specialities, but we're there to work together, just like in mission control. The crew, of course, have training beforehand, and then in addition, they also have training. You can see Sheila here, who was one of Shirley's crewmates as an aquanaut. She's also a PI, and she was training for her experiment, the astronauts on how to operate that. Then being a multifunctional room, we then rearranged that specific room and turned it into mission control. So the mission control is quite tight. It's very functional, very efficient. You only have a maximum of 12 people in there at any given time, including observers. So mainly you would have the mission director, your planner, Capcom, my position, potentially another observer. Your PIs, your scientists, would sit in the front. And then the specialist, for example, if you had an EVA and the crew was going out for one of the water missions, then you would have one of the EVA people there as well, and potentially some additional ops. And really importantly, food and a fridge at the back. I learned very quickly when I was living in America that donuts are apparently super essential to every mission. So I think there was like a unlimited perpetual supply. Sorry for the people underwater, for the aquanauts. I know you didn't have this, but topside definitely had this like miraculously perpetual supply of donuts. One of the side projects, this is not from my Nemo mission, but from the one previously, one of my side projects, though, was to develop this payload, which is a mobile procedure viewer, including a voice-activated armband, so that crew could potentially operate hands-free on the International Space Station instead of having to get an iPad or a laptop when they're working on different procedures, particularly if, you know, your hands busy in a rack working on different things. So this was one of my side projects we developed, and we tested it in Nemo before we sent it up to the space station, which was extremely useful to have the feedback from that and then to iterate more things in the development. As mentioned by Shirley and Nicole and Jess and everyone, there is a big team behind it as well. So this was our full topside and Aquanaut team for the mission. The team themselves were, you know, fitted and suited up with their gear beforehand. And then splashdown day, they were able to suit up in this and dive down. It really spectacular views underwater with the Aquarius Reefbase, and as mentioned, the gazebo. I'm glad I don't have to explain that function. So as Nicole mentioned, the gazebo has specific use as well on the left. And you can see part of the cabling and the umbilicals as well that Grace mentioned. So the outside of Aquarius Reefbase is like this. It's a really well put together unit, and the trailer on the side is actually the science trailer. So we literally had our scientists in addition and kind of a secondary control room, which is really similar to what we do in real life, having the science specialists in a different control room, to the main mission control room, and then we'd have a voice interface with them as well to run different experiments. Then the mission control. So as Shirley mentioned, we use Playbook. So the space station uses a program called Optimus, and it's quite detailed. It's quite packed. The crew have 12-hour work days, Monday to Saturday, basically, and get Sunday off. And Monday to Friday in particular are just chockers from about 7 in the morning to 7 at night, with all of the different activities that crew has to do in 5-minute increments. So this was developed at NASA Ames, and it's Playbook, which is a lot more flexible, so more looking towards crew autonomous operations. The crew can actually shift around their schedule by themselves as well if they think there's a more efficient way of doing it. It updates in real time for both of us. And we can also shuffle things around, or if something's running a bit later or earlier, then we move it in real time in addition. And there's a messaging function and some other things as well to go with that. So it's a lot more dynamic compared to the classic mission control software that we use. The messaging function was quite good because it also, as long as people were logged in, it identified them. And of course, we had cameras inside Aquarius as well. It's not like Big Brother. We don't have the cameras on 24/7. It's only when the crew is aware of it and during operations in the daytime. And the same as the space station, by the way. We only have the cameras on when the crew is aware during the daytime, during specific operations, but not otherwise. And there's never a hot mic. This is Ivy. She's one of the main computer scientists that developed Playbook, and she's on the planning console. I'm on the Capcom console. Capcomming for Nemo is a whole different thing, because in the space station, you saw that there were other people around the world, and there's 6 crew on orbit and there's 5 mission controls. So at maximum, you would be talking to 2 crew at the same time, as opposed to Nemo, where it's just me and I was talking to all the crew at the same time. So I would have one of them on my headset, and then I'd have another one simultaneously on Playbook messaging, and then we had like a Vox walkie-talkie system, and I had another one on that. And I remember one time, I was really working with all 4 in complete parallel, and it was like millennial multitasking to the max, and I loved it. And so here you can see we're setting up for one of the EVAs, testing Lisa, which is a European development to potentially rescue incapacitated astronauts on the lunar surface. So there was a lot of interaction, of course, with that and with the scientists. So back in the trailer, here's a better view of the trailer itself. And we did a lot of dynamic science in the sense that we also were able to pot different experiments down, as well as pot the results back up via the support divers. So the local researchers and the NASA researchers were able to, get the results and be hands-on with them quite quickly, and then look at them and assess them, and then, bundle up different experiments to pop back down again. So the dynamic and kind of fast-paced research environment that we were in was also quite unique as well. And the teams worked really efficiently on that, and that was pretty awesome. I was lucky enough one day to be able to join one of the boats. I mean, I was always kind of in board shorts anyway, being Aussie. And one day I just finished shift and had, brought out my computer to check emails or something and prepare for the next day. And the boat captain said, "Do you want to join and come and have a look at the buoy and the base?" I was like, "Absolutely." So I was able to go out and see the life support buoy that Shauna mentioned. This is really awesome. So yeah, the umbilicals from here come down to Aquarius. In addition, you can see the antenna on top. That's our communications, and you have to have a direct line of sight from the base to the buoy. You can imagine when there's particularly large waves, that doesn't happen. So that's also why the multitasking and multiple channels of communication were really useful, because when you've got that, moving around on waves in particular weather, it's suddenly like, yeah, you've got comms, no, you don't have comms, and AOS, LOS, and you're constantly kind of missing the signal if you don't have a nice ocean surface for the line of sight comms. That's a bit of a closer view now of the life support buoy itself. It's a really great piece of engineering. They did have to repair it quite a bit after the hurricanes, of course, recently, before Shirley's mission. So back with the crew again, they, of course, had the inside space that you've seen from the previous speakers. That's both the communal space as well as conducting ops. And then outside, we had assistive tools similar to what they had on the moon. So the kind of wheelbarrow device, we borrowed that from NASA, and that was extremely useful for taking things around. And then this was the internal development that our chief spacewalk instructor, Hervé, put together as a potential evacuation system for astronauts that they could operate potentially with one hand. So it came as a whole bundle and telescopically sort of packaged up quite nicely. When you put it all together, it could be pulled by just one hand using the blue cable that you can see with it all bundled up. And then when it was fully deployed, the telescopic sort of quad legs, and then it had a pulley in the middle, so you could attach the astronaut to sort of a plus addition, and then pull them up on with the pulley, and then attach the wheelbarrow part underneath it, and then wheel them directly to safety. So this could be done by a single crew to assist their fellow crew member, and most of it could be done one-handed as well, and was totally fine to do with the giant gloves, which is always a big consideration for EVA. So we tested this in the NBF in Cologne, and then we've tested it in Nemo a few times as well now. So this was one of the EVA days where we were testing Lisa. So you can see the crew is really easily pulling it with their hand, just with a single hand, and use the wheels, the way that we position the bundle, the wheels, you know, roll quite well along the floor. And then the crew's able to set it up with one hand and directly, put the, it's not moving. Oh, there we are. So then, yeah, the crew's able to set up the telescopic legs and hoist the crew, and then bring them out completely by themselves as well. And we also tested that originally with giving verbal instructions, and then the crew pretty quickly memorized it and were able to do the runs completely autonomously. And that worked out extremely well. So the other lunar developments that are going on at my workplace are to do, it's actually called Luna. So we're building, well, first of all, we're assisting with COMEX with some of their moonwalk and moon dive suits and the Gandolfi suits. So Peter will speak much more about that later, but that's also been tested quite a bit in our neutral buoyancy facility pool. And then next to my building, we're building a lunar base. So it's a large building. It's 2/3 lunar regolith, like actual lunar regolith simulant that is certified. It has 2 habitats that are attached to it, and they are based on shipping designs. So really weather resistant, as well as they can be pressurized. So you can get quite an accurate analog in that sense. And there's even a crane that attaches to the suit when you're on EVA, so you get the gravity offset of a lunar surface as well. And of course, the control rooms make up the other 1/3 of the building. The lunar regolith itself, we actually got a geologist from Norway, and she worked for a couple of years and managed to source the correct rock supply, and then figure out the correct process to turn it into an accurate lunar regolith simulant. So this is only the 2nd ever certified lunar regolith simulant in the world, inventively named EAC 1 and 2. I think the other one is named like JSC 1 and 2, something like that. And that division of my work has a lot of students and a lot of young people, and they are really looking at much more, really futuristic technology. Think about like lunar regoliths for energy storage, more efficient eclipse systems, 3D printing, the radiation shielding that you need when you don't have the Earth's magnetosphere like we have in LEO on the ISS, and lots of robotic assistance as well. So in addition, towards the lunar program that all of the different agencies are working on, we had in Europe the ATV, which was one of the major cargo vehicles to the station. It also performed reboosts and debris avoidance maneuvers, and the big boost, effectively, which was the one that changed the orbit from 300 to 400 kilometers in 2011. And the propulsion and power for that is now the propulsion and power for the Orion vehicle, which is going to be used to go to the Gateway. And the Gateway is a joint program with all of the International Space Station partners, looking at putting a lunar station in one of the Lagrange points around the moon. So yeah, this is sort of the things that we're working towards. I'm going to put a plug. Sarah and I are both Aussie, and one of my other major side projects was in Australia. So Australia has been involved a little bit passively, but the major tracking stations for launch and for deep space communications have been across Australia for the last 60 years. And they have actively been involved in that way. However, we didn't have a space agency. So one of my major side projects over the last few years was to create the Australian Space Agency with an awesome team. And it launched 2 years ago and has been going really well. I'm very proud of this this project, and I serve still on their industry leaderboard. As a part of that, it's done so well over the last 2 years. We're even now in Australia, we've just signed a $150 million partnership with NASA towards the Moon to Mars initiative. So my home country is going to be participating in that as well. And I'm thrilled to see that development. And I'll leave you with one of the quotes, classic quotes. You're so down to earth and I'm up to the stars. So show me the sea and I'll take you to Mars.
That's so beautiful, Andrea. Thank you so much. And like, you know, you've just so casually said, and as a side project, I've set up a space agency. But we are incredibly proud of you and, of course, the accomplishments here in getting Australia to formalise their activities and their pathway and future contributions. I do have a curious question, because you've also had a background in mining. You've worked with the International Space Station and with undersea crews. You're now preparing, particularly with Europe and future moon missions. With the Lunar Gateway, is there a sense that there are going to be jobs in the future where there'll be an interim mission control, where you'll need to have some sort of management system for operations across the lunar surface in the future?
Yes, but it's more of a mission support center. Because obviously you don't have the real-time comms, so you can't micromanage. And I'm sorry we do that to the crew, but that's how it is. But we very much micromanage ISS and Nemo to some extent as well. But yeah, once you get into more surface operations, Gateway is actually going to be more like a short duration mission, especially at the beginning. So the timeline is going to be packed. Like, the crew has to do it by themselves, but they're going to have a lot to accomplish in a very efficient amount of time with not much tolerance. As opposed to surface operations, which will be more autonomous and more like the playbook, you know, rearrange, we suggest this, but rearrange your own day. And we've done that in analogues as well in different areas where we've done, for example, 3-day in advance planning. So the crew does whatever, and then, you know, we get a report in the evening because we don't have real-time comms, and then we readjust, but in 3 days' time if you need to redo something for a particular experiment. Yeah. So it's kind of like a rolling thing rather than micromanaging real time. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I guess as we've talked to, a lot of the speakers have talked about developing autonomy and smart system capabilities with all of the exploration tools and systems. And of course, putting humans in the loop has been a big part of these conversations. So do you look and see, how do you plan for a future where you're assuming humans are going to have way more autonomy and that you can't micromanage all operations? I mean, is that the ideal in the future? That there will be, you're working towards some self-sufficiency?
Well, it has to be when you have comms delay and you don't have real-time communications. So yeah, definitely. And you know, my background, so I've been in space station for about 10 years and I was mining for 5 years before that. In mining, it's a lot of people involved, but it's also really highly automated as well. So, you know, you can definitely do an efficient hybrid of that. And I think space doesn't do a lot of it yet, but it's definitely working towards that in the future.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Please stick around. We look forward to chatting more and bringing the team all together. And our esteemed speaker for this session today joins us back here on planet Earth, having spent an amazing time at the International Space Station just recently. And in fact, she's returned to planet Earth during a global pandemic, which I'm sure is even more peculiar than usual. It's my pleasure to introduce NASA astronaut Jessica Meir. Jessica is not only an alumni of the International Space University that Shauna and I both attended, but she has a doctorate in marine biology, and she's been a part of the NASA Nemo missions and also has recently returned from the International Space Station. So welcome. We're really pleased that you could join us. And you're in a post-flight or post-mission phase. You are feeling the effects of gravity, and we're very pleased to hear your perspectives.
Okay, thank you very much. It is wonderful to be here on this incredible panel and with this event and speaking to everybody today. That is true, gravity. I'm still feeling it's definitely overrated. I've been back for just exactly, yesterday was exactly, or not quite, almost 3 months now. So I'm still kind of getting used to gravity again. I think I'm pretty well adapted now. I've been doing a lot of hiking and spending time on vacation in Colorado, so that has helped the transition. So I will get right into my presentation here. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I think you can see my slides now. I'm just going to speak a little bit today to continue with the kind of topics that everybody has been speaking about all day, and especially in this session, in looking at the parallels and the connections that we can make between environments here on our own planet Earth and toward exploring space as well. It seems to be a very common theme that really drives a lot of us that are gathered here today, and I'm sure a lot of viewers. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey plunging beneath Antarctic sea ice and eventually making it to my dream and ultimate goal of going to the International Space Station. I just wanted to start by sharing this view, and this was a photograph I took during my mission on the International Space Station. And as you can see here, in this view, you can see nothing but ocean. And it is very plain to see when you're on board the International Space Station that ours is truly a blue planet. As Sylvia Earle and many others have said before me, it is very obvious that Earth is truly a blue planet and that we need to do our best to make sure that we protect our planet's ecosystems and particularly in regard to today, our oceans. This is a view again from the International Space Station of the area where I grew up right here in northern Maine. And from the time that I was very young, my mom says when I was 5 years old, I started saying that I wanted to be an astronaut. So it truly was a dream that I had throughout my entire life. And one of the central themes that has really driven me from that time as a small child is really exploration. Obviously, this is a central component to everything we're talking about both yesterday and today. And I think this is something that drives all of us that are involved with this event. But exploration and understanding more about the world around me, trying to learn more about the biology, the nature. I grew up in this small town in northern Maine. You can see it's actually not close to the ocean. It is pretty remote up here, and there are a lot of trees around, good access to nature. So perhaps that was one of these things that drove me and got me excited and stimulated in nature and the world around me, and stimulated that curiosity in trying to understand more about all of those things.
And Jessica, we'll just get you to click hide when next to that slide sharing tab. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so one thing that I wanted to talk about is, again, that driving element, that exploration theme for me, and what that really led me toward in my previous career and in the current one was this fascination with understanding and pursuing science in extreme environments. And that is something that we've been talking about throughout this entire session. And I'm going to talk about 4 things in particular in both these analog environments that we have here on Earth, as well as on the International Space Station and for future space exploration as well. And these environments have several things in common, and these are the things that I'll highlight today. First of all, an emphasis on training, very, very rigorous training regimes before all of these types of missions that people have been talking about, the Nemo missions, other analogs, and of course our space missions. Safety being absolutely paramount in everything that we do at NASA and in all of these environments as well. How important the element of teamwork is, and this is really multifaceted and something that I think if you start to hone your skills on and focus on early can really make you successful and a highly contributing member to any team, whether it's in an extreme environment under the ocean or in outer space as well. And another commonality with all of these extreme environments to me are these extraordinary views. So these extreme environments have always been the driving factor for what I have been interested in my life. And I think that's because these are the times when I really feel most content and most stimulated in these environments that combine both a mental and a physical challenge. That's really when I feel completely content and alive. And all of these situations, whether it's an underwater mission in the Aquarius Habitat or a mission on the International Space Station, both of these things are combined in really the best of ways. This mental, this physical challenge, which I find really completes me and I think probably excites a lot of you as well. So like the other aquanauts before me, I too was an Aquanaut crew member on a Nemo mission. Actually one of the first ones way back in Nemo 4, back in 2002. You can see I looked a lot younger back then, as did my fellow crew members. I was not an astronaut at the time. I was working at the Johnson Space Center as a scientist, so supporting life science experiments and the types of experiments that are now I am a subject for. So it's really come full circle for me being on the receiving end of these experiments now. But as a life science researcher, we were evaluating the Aquarius Habitat at the time to see if we could use it as an efficient analog for life science experiments. NASA crews were already using it for training, so you can see 2 familiar faces here. Scott Kelly, of course, is quite famous these days. He's just to my left there on the screen, and behind me is Rex Walheim, another very experienced astronaut, as well as Paul Hill, who was a flight director at the time and worked his way higher up into management chain at the Johnson Space Center afterward. And then you see our 2 habitat technicians there on the other side. So if we look back at those fundamental elements that I was speaking about and highlighting in all of these different extreme environments, training. Nicole talked about this as well in some of her slides, how important this rigorous training regime that we have for all of these saturation diving missions. We know this is an extreme environment. It is an inhospitable environment. We have these life support devices that our lives depend on. In this saturation diving environment, of course, we can't just come to the surface like you would in normal scuba diving. So a very rigorous training protocols that we undergo. You can see in this picture here, Rex and I are practicing our buddy breathing if one of us were to run out of oxygen and what we would do. So very, very important in all of these habitats is to instill all of this rigorous training protocols. And this actually instills kind of a muscle memory in everything that we do. And that becomes very, very important to keep us safe in the environments. And I'll get back into that when we pursue into the in the following environments as well. So here we are as a crew. You can see things in the Nemo missions have significantly evolved. As I mentioned, this was one of the first missions, so we were still just using pretty much standard scuba diving equipment, no hard hot diving or other suits that are being used regularly now to make it an even better analog to the spaceflight environment. But still, we had all of these things in common. It's a remote, inhospitable environment. You need a life support system. You're living with a group of others in a very small, confined space. So many parallels to the space environment, which can help train us and prepare us as astronauts, but as well as serve as a test bed for different types of hardware and experiments, provide different comparisons for experimental data, different analog settings for all these experiments that are being conducted. So very, very important for us to use these analogs that we have on Earth that replicate some of these aspects of our life in space. And the Nemo mission has served very, very well for that over the years. So just like in space, we spend a lot of time also inside. We use procedures. We're running various different experiments throughout the mission. We have downtime where just those elements of camaraderie and teamwork skills come out, maybe over just a meal when you're hanging out with your crew members. And those things are very, very important towards successful missions, especially given the fact that we're doing long duration missions now on the International Space Station, typically around 6 months. But as you know, Scott Kelly, shown here, served almost a year in space. Christina Cook, almost a year as well recently. And of course, if we're talking about going to Mars one day, that will be an even longer mission, up to 3 years. So we have to emphasize these aspects of living and working together. I like to think about it as the kind of things who you would want to bring with you on a camping trip. You need to have somebody that knows how to take care of themselves, but is also a good contributing team member that can help care for others as well. You need to have very strong communication pathways, people that have good leadership skills, good followership skills. Really, all of these things contribute toward being a valuable crew member. And I think most importantly, toward having a nice, a positive and happy environment. And these things, we actually have a buzzword at NASA. We call these things expeditionary skills. They're incredibly important now, just as important as your technical skills are. If you don't show that you can be a valuable and contributing crew member and also just a pleasant person to be around, you probably won't be selected to be an astronaut anymore. So very important things to think about throughout all of your life. Again, we have a lot of training and safety protocols. Here you can see we're doing a pre-breathe of oxygen before we end the mission and come out of the habitat to keep us safe. Very similar things that we do. So physiologically, similarities with what we do with a pre-breathe prior to going on a spacewalk. So we're following these safety protocols. We're using these robust pieces of equipment to keep us safe all throughout the mission, no matter what environment we're in. And the last point, Nicole spoke a bit about this as well. Another thing that all of these environments have in common, an extraordinary view. When you're living in the Aquarius habitat, you're really on the opposite side of that fishbowl, and you're looking out on this extraordinary view. And that is certainly something that I'll never forget. I loved living underwater. The last element that I mentioned again is this teamwork. It's not just about the crew members and your fellow crew members, but it's also about your relationships and all the people either topside, as Andrea was speaking about in the previous presentation, or for space again and mission control on the ground. As astronauts, we're always the lucky ones that people want to see and talk to and give these presentations, but we are really the novices compared to everybody else on the ground supporting us. They are the true experts that are training us on everything that we need to know, monitoring everything that we do, and making sure that we are safe, whether it's underneath the ocean or up in the space station. So incredibly important aspect of teamwork. This actually, one of the things that resulted from this Nemo mission, as I mentioned, I was at NASA working as a scientist, and I wanted to go back to school. I love my career there. I had the fortunate opportunity to do amazing things like this Nemo mission, but I still wanted to go back to school and do some more science of my own instead of just coordinating other people's science. So again, I had this fascination with the ocean, particularly after this Nemo mission. I wanted to do more in the marine realm, and I actually went on to study the diving physiology of marine mammals and birds, like these emperor penguins in the Antarctic. And in particular, I was very interested in their diving physiology. A lot of people know how incredible emperor penguins are on the ice, in the behaviors of what the parents go through in order to get their eggs to hatch and to foster their chicks. But I was particularly interested in their extraordinary diving abilities. Emperor penguins can dive for about 30 minutes on a single breath, and they are breath-holding, air-breathing divers just like we are. So really extraordinary diving behavior. And we wanted to understand more about their underlying physiology. So what is unique about their bodies that allows them to exhibit this extraordinary diving behavior? So I was very fortunate that I went to the Antarctic 4 times for this emperor penguin research, and actually a 5th time to test out scuba diving equipment. And you can see here on one of our instruments we have on the back of the emperor penguin, we're monitoring things like their diving behavior, but also their physiological variables, their heart rate, the level of oxygen in their lungs, in their blood, to understand more about how they can exhibit these extraordinary behaviors. And I was very fortunate that I got to do quite a bit of diving down there as well. As I mentioned, sometimes viewing the birds, but also down there for a 5th season and testing out some equipment. I also worked with elephant seals. If Barb Block is still watching, she spoke earlier today, she will recognize this. This top left photo is actually on the beach just outside Barb Block's office. When I did these things, tagging these animals like Barb spoke about today and tagging tuna, trying to understand more about the diving physiology, in this case of the elephant seal. So the best diver of any of the pinniped species. These animals can dive for 2 hours on a single breath. So even more than an emperor penguin, 2 hours, and they're mammals just like us. So we were putting these instruments on to understand more about how these animals function. So that was really, for me, you can see how this is all tying it together, this life and physiology and science in extreme environments, whether I'm studying another animal or now on the other end as an astronaut being studied. So all of this led me to my career as an astronaut, where I had another opportunity for another incredible analog. And this one, I'm not sure if anybody has mentioned it in the last 2 days, but I know several of the people that are part of these events know about the Caves analog as well. So similar to Nemo, to use for training astronauts as another analog for space, the European Space Agency came up with this Caves analog, where we're doing the same types of things in Nemo, but we're doing it in an underground caving environment to test out all of these different principles. So once again, as you can see here in this picture, it's not just about the crew, it's also this incredibly extensive ground team. We had an expert team of cavers from mostly Italian, but an international team that were teaching us everything that we needed to know. You can see with the gear here, we had very complex, very technical caving apparatus here, all the equipment that we use. And this was a very technical mission. We didn't actually have any caving experience. So we went to Italy and Sardinia, and we had about 10 days of intensive training. Again, that really important training element to use all of these different pieces of equipment and safety protocols to keep us safe. And this caving mission was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. I would put it up there with going to space. And Ricky Arnold and Aki Hoshide, who were with me on that, both had previously flown in space. They said the same thing. Almost as extraordinary, equally as extraordinary in a different way. And I still feel that way even after going to space. You can see we were using very technical equipment. As I mentioned, we were sometimes rappelling down, in this case on the left, a 25-meter shaft. So we have all of these rigorous safety protocols and equipment in place. So many parallels here between the way that we operate in space, particularly for spacewalks. And this wasn't a truly marine cave diving mission, but there were some water elements, as you can see, where we are going through some segments of the cave with water. But now actually there are some of the caves missions which are doing cave diving as well. But again, these analog environments are incredibly important to preparing us for training as astronauts, but also toward testing out hardware, communication strategies, protocols, all of these things that are incredibly important for everything that we do, both on and off the planet. As you can see, these views are just simply extraordinary. I was blown away by this cave in Sardinia. There were 25 kilometers of different pathways that you could explore. We were mapping, we were doing real exploration, a lot of parallels for when we go to further to distant planets as well. Just simply one of the most amazing experiences of my life. We were doing lots of different types of scientific experiments as well, taking lots of different types of samples. And again, another parallel, a truly international crew. You can see here a Spanish astronaut, Pedro Duque. We had another NASA astronaut on our mission, a Russian cosmonaut, a Japanese astronaut, and pictured here even a Chinese taikonaut. So truly international endeavor and an extraordinary opportunity to be working with all of these people from very different backgrounds and cultures. This photo really kind of sums it up. You can see some people eating lunch, some people doing science, some people exploring, and just these extraordinary views all around. So really incredible analog experience. Now this leads into the way that we do things as NASA astronauts and into our training. And I'm going to make one comparison for all of these different analog environments toward what we do for spacewalks. And Nicole mentioned a little bit about this as well. We train extensively, of course, in the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, this large pool in Houston at the NASA Johnson Space Center. And as you can see, we have the full mock-up, a full setup of everything on the International Space Station, so that we can not only get used to wearing these very cumbersome, difficult to work in spacesuits, but we can also get used to the layout of things, all the tools, the hardware interfaces. And I mentioned earlier that muscle memory that we build up, and that is absolutely essential. And I can tell you, when I went out of the hatch for my very first spacewalk back in October, I relied on that. All of a sudden, I came out there, I looked at the extraordinary view, and it was something that I will never, absolutely never forget how extraordinary that first view is. When you come out of the hatch, you look down at your boots and there's nothing else between you and the Earth. And it is amazing. And it was even more incredible than I had ever imagined. But right away, you have to be very focused on what you're doing, because spacewalks are really the most physically and mentally challenging aspect of our job. You rely on that muscle memory that you've built up with these incredible training and safety protocols on the ground to go about your job. So as you can see here, all of these training aspects in the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, getting ready for everything that we're doing, and eventually leading toward when I made that first reach toward completing my very first spacewalk. And this is a photograph of me on that first spacewalk in October with fellow astronaut Christina Cook. And Christina took this picture of me just shortly after I came out of the hatch. There's another picture of Christina and I during one of our EVAs, and this was during one of the battery upgrade EVAs spacewalks. So it was the second or third one that we did when we were upgrading the batteries, just like some more astronauts did recently on another power channel on the International Space Station, upgrading these powers to newer lithium-ion batteries, just like you've probably upgraded several of your devices here on Earth for better power capacity. So with that, I think I will go into showing a little bit of my mission video, and hopefully I'll be able to speak to some highlights on that and then have time for some questions. So just a couple last views on which I was fortunate enough to have during those spacewalks. And that, of course, is, again, the importance of the ground team. This was the incredible ground team that supported Christina and I during those 3 spacewalks here in Mission Control in Houston. And with that, I will stop sharing and let Joe take over to show the mission video. So starting here with our launch of the Soyuz spacecraft, my commander, cosmonaut Oleg Skripochka, and also Hazza Ali Al-Mansouri. He was the very first astronaut from the United Arab Emirates.
Copy. I can see a roll angle here.
Here we're approaching to dock the International Space Station.
I confirm the contact.
Astronaut Jessica Meir making her first flight to the station.
As you can see, I don't think I've ever looked happier than that moment.
Coming in through the hatch and seeing all these familiar faces feels like home already. It's going to be an amazing 6 months.
Even things like eating are much more fun in space. This is the ARED. This is how we lift weights in space. So of course, incredibly important to maintain our bone density and muscle mass. We have the weightlifting device, the treadmill, and then also the cycle ergometer for bicycling. So we exercise every day on the International Space Station. Our tribute to the Apollo 12 mission, since as we know, we were celebrating 50 years last year. And of course, the space station is all about science. So a few views of the different scientific experiments that we're doing when we're being guided through these experiments with our procedures, but also with incredible capsule communicators like Andrea. We're launching some small satellites out of the airlock in the Japanese experiment module here. We grew lettuce during my mission. So that was I loved that experiment because we were caring for these growing plants on the space station every day. And then we actually got to eat half of the lettuce as well. We did a lot of experiments, so a lot of very cool biology experiments in the life sciences glove box, looking at things like bone cells, muscle cells. This is an experiment called fluid shifts that was looking at all the different aspects of our human physiology given the fluid shift that we have in the space environment. Here's one of our freezers. We're getting some samples or retrieving some samples here, keeping things cool, just like a -80 freezer in a lab. And of course, spacewalks. We conducted 9 spacewalks during Expedition 61, which is really pretty unheard of, the number of doing that many spacewalks. We had the AMS series.
Proud of you. You're going to do great today. We'll be waiting for you here in a couple hours when you get home. Have a great, great EVA.
Drew, thank you so much. Thank you, Drew. Thank you so much.
So as mentioned, we had these battery upgrade spacewalks. The first one actually was an unplanned contingency spacewalk to replace the battery charge discharge unit from something that had gone wrong in the upgrade for that power channel. So Christina and I did that first one, which was really a contingency spacewalk. And then the second 2 were to finish the battery upgrade of that channel. The AMS, or Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer, EVAs, or spacewalks, also occurred during our mission. Drew Morgan and Luca Parmitano were the ones that did those to repair this incredible piece of scientific equipment that's mounted on the outside of the space station. And that is measuring things like high energy radiation from the cosmos, understanding more about the origins of our universe. So really, really incredible science. We also fly the Canadarm, the robotic arm, in order to capture visiting vehicles, which bring us more supplies, resupply cargo vehicles like the SpaceX vehicle, the Cygnus vehicle, and we had several of these captures during my mission as well. I actually captured both a Cygnus and a SpaceX vehicle. Lots of cargo operations when you're unloading all of these various contents of the cargo vehicles. Sometimes some fresh fruit and vegetables, which we had there from one of the Japanese cargo vehicles. Like Nicole said, the best way to spend your time when you're not working, even though there isn't a lot of that free time, is looking out the window. And we took a lot of photographs as well. I think it's an incredible contribution that we can make from these true Earth observation photos for scientific uses as well as for our personal uses. So we actually do things like look down and take photographs of sites like the Patagonia ice fields, for example. Astronauts have been photographing sites like that for decades now. So scientists can actually use those photographs to monitor things like the retreat of the glaciers in that area. So there are a lot of scientific uses for the photographs that we take on the space station as well. That's the Nile. You can see all of the civilization in Africa around Nile exploding into Cairo there. You can also see Israel in that previous image. And the aurora, one of the most incredible things to see, of course, the northern and southern lights from space. Unfortunately, all things have to come to an end. If it were up to me, I would have stayed up there much longer. I was up there for almost 7 months, and it really wasn't enough for me. But we did have to come home, as was mentioned earlier, during the pandemic. So very strange for us to be returning to a completely different planet than the one that we left. And that was, 3 months ago yesterday that we landed back in Kazakhstan, April 17th. And that is, that's all I wanted to show you today. Hopefully we're gonna have some time for some questions. So thank you very much. And it was wonderful to share a bit about my mission with you.
That was absolutely brilliant, Jessica, and welcome back safe and sound. That's the most important thing. I do have a question. We have many questions here, and we're looking forward to coming together to ask them. But before we do that, you talk about the tremendous amount of activities to develop that expeditionary skill set, to develop the neural plasticity and the body memory for these extraordinary experiences. You've had them, you've been out and you've stepped out in an EVA environment to peer down at planet Earth well beyond your feet. What does it feel like coming back to Earth, and is there a part of that body memory that lingers with you? Do you still feel that sense of altered gravity or microgravity being in your body?
That's an interesting question, and it was actually something that I thought a lot about while I was still in space. And I had heard some other astronauts speak about this, about when you come back, it's very strange because you've been up there for so long. After a few months, you feel like, wow, it seems so weird to think about walking because it just feels normal. You really do feel normal just doing everything floating as your normal part of your day. And so I talked a lot about this with my crewmates. It just seems strange to think about walking. But what I was worried about was, well, I spent 7 months in space, but I spent 40+ years here on Earth. So I'm kind of wondering if when I go back, I'm just going to quickly go back to that. And maybe this is all going to seem like a dream. And that is, I actually do find that I have to remind myself. And so it's actually really nice for me to do things like watch that mission video because I remember what it was like. Already walking, of course, feels normal again. And it does almost seem like it was a dream that I was up there. So I like doing these things is just as important for us as it is for everybody else because it reminds us about how unique and how special that opportunity was.
Brilliant, brilliant. We have a quick question from YouTube coming in from Ron, who wanted to know specifically, what was your landing like in the Soyuz?
Yeah, we of course talk a lot to our training teams in Russia and also other astronauts and cosmonauts about the whole landing process. So just like that muscle memory that I spoke about for spacewalks, we have that in the Soyuz spacecraft as well. I actually flew in the left seat of the Soyuz, which is basically the co-pilot. So I had a lot of responsibilities during takeoff and for landing. And again, all of that muscle memory really just comes right back in. Actually, during launch, I had to remind myself that it was real. I had spent so many hours training in the simulator. You're going through all of the exact motions you're used to, and you have to try to remember, wait, there's something different. This time it's real. So landing was extraordinary, particularly there are a couple of really dynamic moments. And that, of course, when you're coming through the atmosphere and you are seeing through the window just by your head, you're seeing this orange plasma glow and you're basically on fire. And of course, that is a pretty extraordinary view. And then when the parachute deploys as well, that is, there's quite a jolt, and then you feel like you're in a washing machine. I mean, for that period, it's a relatively short period, but you're being thrown and moved in every direction. It's hard to even describe what kind of motion it is. And then you're under the chutes and it's, it's more calm once things are fully open. And then you get ready for that soft landing that they call it. Other people have described it as sort of like a car crash. I actually thought that the landing was quite soft. It actually was quite soft, but maybe that's just because of what I was expecting. I didn't move at all. I really didn't even feel my head move or anything. I was really prepared for that. Maybe it was just how I fit in my seat liner, but it actually felt to me softer than I anticipated.
Brilliant, brilliant. We have another cheeky question. Did Luca share his Italian food with you?
Of course, as an expeditionary skills, we all shared everything that we had up there. And that is one of the best parts about the mission, sharing that environment. It is an international environment with the Russian cosmonauts, with, Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano. And so we shared food, we shared stories and experiences. Luca actually prepared a whole special Italian meal for us. He flew up enough food to have a whole Italian meal. We had a lasagna that the European Space Agency made, and a bunch of other things as well. So it was a very special experience. Luca was great at sharing, just like the rest of us.
That cheeky question didn't come from me, but that came from the message board there. I'm going to invite all of the panelists back in, if you don't mind, and we'll continue with the questions. And there is a lot for you, Jessica, coming in from the public stream as well, which we will try and get through. This question is for both Nicole and Jessica, which was, if you could describe what was the most important lesson that you had learned on board the International Space Station. Obviously, these are things that we learn to bring back to Earth, just as the Aquanauts are learning from a different vantage. Is there anything we can sum up quickly?
Okay, I'll start then, Nicole, and then I would say flexibility. It's something that in all of these environments, we know we are trained to do that, but just something that you always have to remember, to be flexible and to be ready to adapt. Because we have those rigorous training protocols and safety protocols in place, it is easy for us to do that. But being able to keep that open mind and to be able to adapt and be ready for anything that comes our way is really, I think, one of the most important things.
Yeah, I totally agree, by the way. And I think there's kind of we talked about this yesterday. I mean, I think there's so many things we learn from this experience in space, and a lot of it is technical, a lot of it is how we behave with each other. But I will go back again to the thing I think that ultimately came out of it for me was more about the who and where, really the reality of the who and where we all are together in space already. And that, this idea of, simple things like we live on a planet, we're all Earthlings, only border that's mattering is that thin blue line of atmosphere. And thanks for sharing those beautiful pictures, Jessica, because, oh my gosh, it is stunning from both above and below.
That's so true. I think we've spoken a lot over the last 2 days about technical aspects and human aspects, and what we're all converging on is a sense that these activities and these places are challenging us to work or to take steps towards some kind of transformation. And we don't often use that language when we're working professionally, but that is something that is coming out of the work that we are doing in very many ways. Andrea, you have a very different perspective. Do you see and do you notice the transformation in crews as you're watching them undertake their missions, when you're working with Jessica and her EVAs or on a Nemo mission? Do you see that occurring with the teams?
I think that a lot of that goes with the expeditionary skills that Jessica mentioned. So the astronauts are selected for teamwork, and in the very beginning, crew was selected more for, I don't know, being kind of cowboy pilots, and they were terrible at working with anybody else, but that's kind of how the selection process was. You don't really get bad astronauts anymore in that sense. Everybody can work well with everybody, and you've got so much teamwork during the training as well. that at least from observation and from hanging out with different crew members, the Soyuz crews are really tight knit and kind of family-like almost, as well as extremely talented colleagues. So I think there's extraordinary teamwork and expeditionary skills, and everybody is primarily focused on keeping everybody else safe. And then getting the mission done as well, and that's how we operate, and it's goes quite well.
So these questions are going backwards and forwards, so I apologize, it's a bit disjointed, but one of the questions back to Jessica was, how did capturing the Cygnus compare to capturing your first penguin?
Well, I would say they're very different skills in terms of catching an emperor penguin and catching the Cygnus, but both involve a lot of similarities. We have a technique to do it. We have a lot of hand-eye coordination, which is really important when you're flying the Canadarm to capture the Cygnus. A lot of hand-eye coordination when you're sliding in to tackle that emperor penguin as well. So two very different birds, but some similarities there. And I'd also just like to add to what Nicole said. I think the one thing when you have this opportunity to look back at the planet, I think the central message for really what everyone's been saying today is you look down and it's so plain, so easy to see that we are all in this together. And that was something that really echoed to me throughout my mission first, and how I'd always thought about environmentalism and taking care of our planet and seeing that thin band and how fragile our beautiful planet is. I knew I would feel that, but then throughout the mission as well, when this global pandemic took over and swept across the entire globe, so easy for us, like Nicole mentioned, no man-made boundaries that are drawn on the planet when we're looking down on it from up there. And in terms of the civil unrest in our country here as well, really that just underlying message of understanding, it's so plain to see when you're looking down on the earth from above that we're truly all in this together.
It's such an incredible perspective, and we know how important that is. It is so precious that you can share that with us, and it's so important that it is heard and understood as best we can. One of the questions comes from Kyle Forster, who has worked with, I think, Shauna before. His particular question was to Jessica, and that was, what is your favorite lesson learned from collecting data in the field? You've spoken about being a research technician and then going back to university to become a researcher so that you could direct that. And he wondered, are there any times when you had an idea in the field that made later analysis easier or harder?
I guess a bit difficult to think of a particular example for that offhand, but I think, again, it goes back to that flexibility in all of these environments. And the number one thing that I would say that really drove me for the types of research that I did, some people looked at the types of experiments I was trying to run, like training geese to fly in a wind tunnel. And we didn't even talk about that one today since it wasn't in the marine realm. But for me, it was about trying to look at those exciting big questions, but realizing in doing so, there's a pretty big risk involved. And I think, to me, without taking that type of risk, you really won't get the reward. And it is a risk because it might not give you all of the same high number of publications that you need to become a successful scientist. That there is a big risk of failure, but it's something that I really like to encourage everybody, especially kids starting out and people starting out in their careers, that you truly do need to be ready to take a risk and accept that, and also to realize that it's important to fail and it's okay to fail along the way. You should expect that, because that's something that those are the times when you really learn and then can eventually even propel yourself further. So I would say that's something that field work in those kinds of scenarios, high risk scenarios, really taught me, is just being willing to take that risk.
So I guess both Shirley and Grace, you've worked on missions underwater with crews who have been, like Shirley, you worked with the Nemo crews, but you came in as an external scientist with your own research projects. You had your own autonomy there. And similarly, Grace, you worked on somebody else's sort of cinematic focused mission. And through that, you've developed other field research possibilities that have taken you both further. Perhaps you could also respond and talk through how being in the field has changed your thinking or given you ideas for how to better conduct your research and your work?
Our mission, Nemo 23, in which the principal investigators, so in our case, Chilla, Ari, and I were actually there doing the science as well. So I was doing the marine science, Chilla was doing some of the neuroscience. And so that was a little bit different. I saw there was a question in the chat about if the astronauts had ever talked with any of the scientists whose work they were conducting on their behalf. So for us, it was a little bit different to see how it would be if, with the principal investigators, the PIs actually there. For me, there were a lot of takeaways. So just as we were using some instruments that were designed to be used for ocean-based research, I also was able to take away from the mission a lot of really interesting and good ideas about how to adapt that to my field research and also planning as well. I mean, Playbook was awesome. That was just it kept us on track, but it really, there were a lot of features of that I think could be really adapted very well to, land-based science as well. I'll turn it over to Grace.
Yeah, I think spending time out in the field is essential for developing research questions and then realizing any kind of biases in your data. And with engineering tools, the most important thing when you build something is to test it and test it over and over and over again until you find all the ways that it can break. And then I can fix those and adapt to those. So anytime I'm building underwater technology, I try to get it in the water as quickly as possible. Yeah, I think spending a lot of time in the field is crucial.
That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. But one of the questions a statement really coming in from Bill Snook was to let's build a new habitat, which obviously would enable us all to be in the water a little bit longer. Shauna, if you were going to build a new habitat, what specific things would you particularly like to see, particularly from a physiology and a physician's point of view, for enabling crews to live and work safely underwater? Let's build a village. Where do we start?
Yeah, so when you talk about building medical capabilities for ice environments, you have to look at what is your safety net? What is your lifeboat? So, for example, drawing on the two underwater experiences I've had at Aquarius Reefbase versus Jules Undersea Lodge, they're only 13 miles apart, both off the Florida Keys. But Jules Undersea Lodge, being at 20 feet, is essentially surface pressure. If there's a fire in the hab, you can evacuate straight up, no decompression time. Conversely, with Aquarius Reefbase, you are 50 feet underwater. You need to decompress for 15 hours and 47 minutes. Otherwise, you risk a dive injury, air embolism, decompression sickness. It's just bad news. So that would be kind of what would guide my decision making is how much time to evacuation do I have? If it's immediate, then I would just need to stabilize and evacuate immediately. If there is a delay, and as we chatted about earlier, there's more of a delay at Aquarius than there is at the ISS, I would build out more extensive capabilities, so more than just basic life support, add some advanced life support capabilities, things that may borrow from the principles of prolonged field care from our colleagues in the military, to round out that initial medical development. So it's a fascinating question that I spend a lot of time talking about, not just for underwater habitats, but say low Earth orbit with ISS versus the moon versus Mars. So it's a fun question, it's a challenging question, but it's an important question.
Brilliant. And I'm going to open it up a little bit because with individual discussions with all of you, you've all actually converged on a similar topic, which we haven't yet shared, and I think the exchange would be lovely. A number of you have mentioned a difference in cognitive shift or a perceptual shift that occurs being underwater or in space, and that might be a perceptual shift with recognition of your own physiological changes, but also trying to understand how is your brain and how are you perceiving those changes. You've all spoken about them from a very different perspective. Before I get to, maybe Shirley, would you like to start? You noticed something was cognitively happening when you were at Nemo. What was going on?
Yeah. And I was probably one of the older ones who did this in an extreme environment. So for me, I found that I was way more focused in Aquarius than I am on land. I mean, I can multitask pretty well, but I found that I was really, really focused. And I alluded to this one, exercise that we did with a lunar landing. I mean, I don't do joysticks and stuff like that. That's not my generation. I was just acing it in the Aquarius and not on land at all. So there was something that was going on, and it was more than just like when you're, like, for example, when we go out on missions and we're at sea, there's a routine. So, it's fairly easy to stay on track because you're not distracted by a lot of other things, especially if you don't check your email. We could check our email in Aquarius as well, but we were really super, super busy. So I just felt that I was way, way more focused. I had to do, I had to be like the communications person. Thanks for the happy birthday message, by the way. I had to be the communications person on the very first extravehicular activity. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute, you mean Capcom's not going to do this first? And right away you learn how to do, stand by, because you're talking to a lot of people, and I just found that I was way more focused in the habitat.
It's actually really extraordinary for Shirley in particular, because with the crew, like, they're so highly trained and expected to be, well, there's a saying in the cosmonaut training center, like, we select cosmonauts and then we make them superhuman. And the timelines that crew are expected to work to, and that you kind of almost get used to, it's like a new level of normal. That's a ridiculous level of normal, and a really extraordinary one with the crew on ISS. And then we do basically the same schedules with Nemo as well. So having non-astronauts like step up and adapt to those schedules and that level of focus is really extraordinary. Yeah.
So is it just the scheduling, or is there something physiologically going on? And do you notice a difference between a saturation condition underwater and being in space?
I can say that I certainly noticed something that was very plain that I mentioned yesterday to some of you. When in going to space, you could actually sense the plasticity in our human brain, that ability of our brain to adapt very quickly. And that was something that I could actually feel. And I think most of that has to do with a big difference in space, in using just this 2 or maybe at most 3-dimensional space around you, to in space using really all of the volumetric space around you. You're on Earth using the spaces in front of you on the floor with this gravitational vector mainly, but in space we're using the space on the walls and on the ceiling. And I could actually feel that shift in my brain. There was actually this sort of flip-flop in those first couple weeks. If you're looking down on what you would normally interpret as down towards your feet in the gravitational vector orientation of the space station on Earth, you felt familiar in space in that orientation. But then suddenly if you switched and you jumped up to the overhead location, which would be equivalent to like a ceiling on the Earth, but of course in space it doesn't matter, you first of all always feel like Spider-Man when you jump up there because your brain is just oriented that way. But then if you're there working on that surface for one period of time, I would actually feel this flip-flop of my brain, and I would then kind of interpret that as down, even though I knew I was in this overhead location. And I had spoken about this with other astronauts as well. They experienced the same kind of thing, but within only about 2 to 3 weeks, it just shows how remarkably the plasticity, how remarkable that human brain plasticity is. Within 2 to 3 weeks, I was using different ways in order to spatial orient myself. So I didn't have that kind of flip-flop thing happening anymore. Instead, I would sort of understand where I was spatially by objects, the location of certain objects, and then your brain has really just remapped, and it's not something that you're even doing consciously anymore. And I found that simply astounding, given that we have evolved the entire species of humans, and of course our very short personal lifetimes, we've always had this 1G gravitational vector, and to see what the brain can do in a completely different environment like that was quite astounding to me, especially as a physiologist.
speaking of that, from a physiological point of view, Nicole or Shauna, is you've worked on missions where you've been wearing EEGs. What's going on in those missions?
Nicole, go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, I don't know. I'll just be honest with you. I mean, I think I still had a brain. That was good. But I can tell you, like Jessica was saying, it is so cool how I'll let Shauna answer the technical, what's really happening in there. How our brains and our bodies just very quickly adapt. It's incredible. So it gives me hope. I mean, real hope for, the exploration we want to do in the future to, further off our planet, deeper in the ocean, even, surface exploration here on Earth where, we need life support systems to, to survive there, these otherworldly places that we haven't, really explored yet. Really amazing. And it's not just kind of the physical cognitive side of it, I don't think. I think it's our, physically our bodies do something different. Like, I always like to use the example of like the bone and muscle thing is if we didn't do those exercises that Jessica showed in her video, our brain and our body is figuring out, hey, I'm in this new environment. I don't need these bones or muscles anymore, in mass like they are or in their current condition to survive here. So I'm not going to waste any energy maintaining them. So we have to be very proactive and deliberate about those countermeasures, for when we want to come back, when we want to come back here to Earth in that 1G environment as well. And I just saw Shauna Shirley put something on the thing about her body's experience in Aquarius, where I had the same thing. I was, we were working out every day with the diving we were doing, and I think it was a little chilly. So your body, your metabolism is maybe kicking into gear a little bit higher. We ate nachos and, like junk a lot during that mission. I got back to the surface and my pants were too big, so I physically don't know what was happening there, but I think they could probably, maybe we could build that undersea village by having the resort side of it as well, but to fund it. But we are an incredible, system. It's just really, really neat to see it, to study it, to feel it. And the other thing I'll say is, Jessica, you mentioned this idea of like it just becoming natural. I remember before flying, watching people, on NASA TV and in mission control, and just being in awe of this very graceful movement that was happening with them as they flew through the station and rolled and flipped and just in that 3 dimension. And now I look at it like it just seems normal. And that to me, that's cool how our brains can capture and process that too. Yeah, I could talk all day about that one. That's the rambler that I am.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So we actually, during our underwater mission at Neptune, the Neptune mission at Jules Undersea Lodge, we actually looked at evoked potentials and what that reflected about cognition and learning. And so we put ourselves, we were a crew of 5, we put ourselves through tracing activities, through learning activities on the surface during the mission. Thanks for the happy birthday, by the way, and back on the surface. And so 5 is an incredibly small sample size. So we noticed trends towards an underwater learning effect that disappeared when we're back again on the surface. We're still analyzing the data. Hard to say that you'll get any significance from that, but it is interesting to note. And then, it's interesting to note, how will these be reflected long term, and how will these effects, vary depending on the environment, vary based on the level of saturation or the depth you're at, based on whether you're in microgravity, 1/6 gravity, 1/3 gravity. There's so many fascinating points of physiology to think about going forward.
Encapsulated, the 2 key words that have come out of this session, I think, have been the expeditionary skills and also this evoked potential, and our searching for that through not only our activities, but our interactions, our crew, our teamwork, our courage, and our connection. Ladies, I have to wrap this up, but one quick statement from each of you on what is your call to action for the next 50 years? What is it that we can call for future generations? Somebody did suggest an undersea fat farm. I'm not sure that that's the key priority, but Grace, what would be your call to action?
Oh yeah, we need to keep exploring. We still have so much to learn, and the organisms underwater, in space, but especially underwater, have so much to teach us about how to survive and thrive on our planet. So keep exploring.
Brilliant. We'll go to Andrea. What is your call to action?
I think, you know, I keep saying that ISS is the closest thing we have to Starfleet. And the ISS isn't going to be around for another 50 years. It's done an awesome dash already, had humans for 20 years, been around even more than that. And I think we should keep the international collaboration going, you know, beyond the ISS as well, and have you know, new projects like the Gateway and other things to work on together. And it's not a space race; it's more of a you know, international space village that we're working towards on ground and off Earth.
And Shirley, are you going to build a Starfleet?
No, I'd have to say that for me, I think for me the most important thing would be to engage our children, get children engaged at a very early age, teach them the value of the ocean, teach them the value of planetary exploration, including our own planet. To me, that's the call to action. Get our children engaged at a very, very early age.
And Shauna, your call to action?
Yeah, absolutely. My call to action for anyone who's out there, regardless of their career stage, regardless of how young or old or what discipline you are, is if you have something you're curious about, if you're passionate about it, ask questions. This is probably the best time in history to inform yourself through citizen science, through massive online open courses, through YouTube videos. Just learn. You know, if you think you're passionate about something, form that hypothesis, test whether you're truly passionate about it, explore. This is your time to ask questions, to learn, and to become that domain expert and to explore.
Brilliant, brilliant. And Nicole, thank you. Your call to action.
I would say, you know, I would ask everybody here as part of this panel and in the audience as well, because I have to believe that all of us here understand our roles as crewmates here on Spaceship Earth. I would ask that we all take the action to share, and I think it comes down to what Jessica said about the expeditionary training. That applies to us as humanity as well. And then on top of that, I would say be engaged. Really and truly understand what's going on on the planet around you. And if you have the right to, vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before we go to Jessica, Jessica, to contextualize this, we recognize that it has been 20 years of human habitation at the International Space Station. We've had more than 50 years where people have lived and worked underwater. And there are people all over planet Earth that have never lived or been near any of these spaces, but you've captured their imaginations, and part of our role in moving forward is to be able to share in these experiences, to invite people to care for these spaces. Bill Todd had quickly mentioned that at some point the French were working on an undersea station that would travel around the world. Wouldn't that be wonderful, he says. And to thank all of you for your contributions and efforts. Jessica, could you leave us with passing words and explain your call to action? You've just returned to planet Earth, and therefore your perspective is quite heightened at the moment. What is your message for the next 50 years or more?
Well, tough to follow all those wonderful statements from the other panelists. I agree with everything that they've said. And I would just close with something that I said earlier as well, and just remembering that as humans, we truly are all in this together. We truly are one human. And that's so easy for us to see from the vantage point of the space station when you have the extraordinary and unique opportunity to be one of the lucky ones that gets to see the Earth from above. And that applies from everything toward our exploring, toward our following our passion, to our responsibility to carry out responsible stewardship, both on our planet and as we explore further, and even on to how we are going about our everyday interactions in terms of this global pandemic, and realizing what we need to do to protect other people, to wear a mask and make sure that we're all doing our duty as one human beings, one humankind. Again, even with the civil unrest, as I mentioned, in our country that we are facing right now. Just to remember for all humans that we are in this together.
That's a beautiful way to close. So thank you, all of you. We are all humans, we're in it together, and we're on this ocean planet that we all care for. So thank you, wonderful women of sea and space.
Bye, thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And our next guest, it gets better from here. We are honored to welcome, if she's there with us, the Chair Emeritus of the SETI Research Institute. Professor Jill Tata comes from a background in both astronomy and engineering. She has served as the project scientist at NASA's SETI program, and she works with the Allen Telescope Array, looking at basically sending signals, receiving signals, trying to understand signs of life of both known and unexpected sources of emissions that potentially can be picked up by these technologies. She's going to tell us, or help us expand beyond the sense of sea and space that we've already covered, to go even further across time and space. Welcome, and thank you, Jill. Thanks you for joining us.
You're very welcome. I thought I was sharing my screen. Yes, okay. So you've just now been talking about the perspective, and the perspective that we've gained from exploring the oceans and the space around the Earth. And I'd really like to challenge us now to stretch our brains into a more cosmic perspective, because I think that's really important for the long future of humans and all life on this planet, actually. So when you start thinking about trying to answer this question, are we alone in the universe? You have to begin to think about, in a different way, with a different perspective of what we mean by here and by now, right? So let's start with here. That's what we've been doing a little bit this afternoon. So for me, and for most of us, we are now, oops. Well, this is interesting. The slides aren't advancing, and they were before.
Jill, try and stop your screen share and come back in. It had been sharing for a while, so maybe that's why.
Okay. How do I stop the screen share now? I've been doing it for so long, I've forgotten.
Yeah, just hit the bottom, the share screen button at the bottom will stop it.
It's the problem, I don't see the share screen button at the bottom. Stop screen, it's that screen. Sorry, stop screen, okay. And then we'll try it again. And it's this screen that I want to share. And we hide this.
Yep.
Oh, but I have to do it over here. Okay, now let's see if we can advance the slides. Joe, that didn't work.
You're using 2 monitors, I think?
I'm using 3, actually.
Okay. Try just clicking on the presentation and then try. Sometimes you just need to click on the presentation to make sure you're locked into it.
Okay, that apparently was what was needed. So I'm talking about here and now. And so for most of us now, here is here. We're working from home. And in my case, that's on Shasta Road in the Berkeley Hills in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And if we were at the altitude of low Earth orbit, we'd see ourselves here, right, on the western coast of the United States. And since 1968, when Bill Anders took this Christmas Eve photo, we've been able to see ourselves here. And this was our first real opportunity to see ourselves in a larger cosmic perspective. And it's really changed a lot about how we live our lives, and it's certainly become an emblem for the environmental movement. In summer of 2013, if you got the memo to go outside and wave, this is a snapshot that a selfie that Cassini took of all of us on that little white dot at the end of the arrow. And long before that, in 1990, as the Voyager 1 spacecraft passed by Neptune, it turned around homeward and gave us this image of our pale blue dot. So our sun and the planets are just one of 400 billion stars in a large spiral galaxy called the Milky Way. And this is not an image of the Milky Way because we can't get outside of the galaxy to look back to take this image. It's an image of a galaxy called M101. We very much thought that if we could get out of the Milky Way, this is how it would look. And although we can't take a picture of the Milky Way from the outside, we can in fact use radio telescopes to map the methane and carbon monoxide gas in the star-forming regions of our galaxy. And with something like 5,000 hours of radio telescope time, we can actually map our galaxy from the inside out. And this is how it looks. Now, the images, the spots here in this Hubble Deep Field are not stars, they're each individual galaxies. And each of those galaxies has hundreds of billions of stars. And so this is the context of where we are. And then when are we? What's now? Well, now is the epic of evolution of our cosmos over 13.8 billion years. And I have to confess that scientists aren't yet completely comfortable with this evolutionary period or picture because we've only ever observed about 4% of the mass and energy density of our cosmos. So we can expect that this picture of cosmic evolution will change going forward in time as we learn more. So scientists talk about dark matter, dark energy. Dark is just a label that means we don't know, right? And we have a problem at the very earliest times, the very smallest, highest densities, smallest regions, where we can't make gravity and quantum mechanics play nice together. So we've got lots of science to understand in order to be able to better describe those first moments. But this, as I said, this picture will change with time and self-correction, which is the way that scientists work. But the important thing is to change our thinking about the scale of time that we're talking about, right? So humans, we trace our lineages back through the centuries of our families, and then back through the millennia of our architecture and art and experiments with different forms of government. And then we trace our lineage not just back over the millions of years since we branched off from the apes, and not just back to the 2.4 billion years during which Earth's atmosphere has been perfused with oxygen thanks to the photosynthetic labors of cyanobacteria, right? And not just back to the 4.568 billion years ago when our solar system formed. We've got to go back millions of years before that to a huge cloud of gas that was polluted with the emissions of Wolf-Rayet stars and the remnants of supernova explosions from previous generations of stars. The iron atoms in your hemoglobin molecules in your blood and the calcium in your bones, they were cooked up inside massive stars that blew up and then were incorporated again into the next generation of star formation and planet formation. Just as this current beautiful supernova remnant may find its way into another generation of planetary systems and perhaps life. So what we've learned over the past 50 years is that it takes a cosmos to make a human. That's a really profound statement. Humans are intimately connected with long ago events and far away places. And in the next 50 years, hopefully we'll continue on this journey of scientific exploration, including looking for life beyond Earth. And how do you find life beyond Earth? Well, we could discover it. We could explore our solar system and find in situ biomarkers. We might even find artifacts. We can study the atmospheres of nearby planets around other stars, exoplanets, perhaps deduce that there's some biology on the surface of the planet because of disequilibrium chemistry in its atmosphere. Perhaps we can detect its work product. We can do SETI. We can look for technosignatures, some evidence of engineering that is changing its environment in ways that we can search remotely. And we might serendipitously, while observing with new instruments to understand astronomy and astrophysics, we might serendipitously detect some large-scale astroengineering projects. And of course, we can perhaps export it. The moon, Mars, asteroids, something like Breakthrough Starshot, trying to go and explore the closest star system to us, the Proxima Centauri system. So this is a really exciting roadmap and of possibilities for the next 50 years. In the past 50 years, there have been some enormous game changers that makes it seem much more realistic to try and implement this roadmap than it might once have. And that's the detection of extremophiles, life of all size scales that live in environments that many of you have explored, which are totally hostile to an unprotected human, but for which these organisms have evolved to be perfectly happy. And then the discovery of exoplanets and now perhaps even exomoons, planets orbiting other stars from the sun. This was unknown, both of these things, unknown 50 years ago, and now really making the question of, is there life beyond Earth, seem far more reasonable and within our grasp of answering, perhaps. So we know today that there are more planets than stars in our Milky Way galaxy. On average, each star has about 2.5 planets. And some of those planets are unlike any of the ones that we have in our own solar system. And some of those planetary systems are very unusual. For example, a couple of years ago, we found the TRAPPIST-1 system. We detected 7 Earth-sized planets orbiting around a small dwarf star. And these images that you see here on the New York Times front page are an artist impression. We've actually never seen any of those planets. We know they're there because they cast a shadow when they pass in front of their star. And in the next 50 years, we will be building telescopes that can image these planets. And what if, when we actually got the opportunity to look at these planets in detail, what if we found something like this? What if 2 or 3 or more of those planets were all the same? They shouldn't be. They're at different distances from their star. They should be at different temperatures. But what if life and technology evolved on one of those planets? And it evolved to the state where it could, in fact, visit a neighboring planet and alter it to be more like home and more preferable habitation and habitable real estate. What if we find something like this? Might it just be that this would be our first clue that there are, in fact, other technological civilizations in the cosmos? Now, I really like the opportunity to talk about this subject to audiences, just as you've been talking this afternoon, because I think that getting people to think about the cosmos, to think beyond Earth, has the effect of holding up a mirror to all of us on this planet and saying, see, when compared to something else that might be out there, you're all the same. We're all the same, in spite of the problems that we sometimes have getting along. This thinking in a larger cosmic term trivializes the differences among humans. And as you were just saying, I think that that is absolutely critical. And so I'll end with some words from Caleb Scharf, who's the director of the astrobiology department at Columbia University. And Caleb reminds us that on a finite world, a cosmic perspective isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. The challenges that we face on this planet do not respect national boundaries. We are going to have to figure out how to be good stewards and husbands of this planet together, globally. And so my challenge to you is that when you get back to your devices, go in and change your profile so that the first thing that you say about yourself is that you're an Earthling, and then act like it. Thank you.
That is so appropriate and timely. From one Earthling to another, I'm trying to act like it, but I want to, for a second, try to recognize that you do an incredible job in the communication of really complex ideas and really thought-provoking and important ideas. And that challenge, it does echo that below and beyond challenge, echoes the work of Sylvia Earle and the people who are trying to develop an ocean consciousness as much as you are trying to expand this cosmic consciousness. And I reflect immediately on, say, the Aboriginal Australian cosmology and this sense of everywhen, the idea of the collapsing of time and space in a way that becomes affirming rather than terrifying, that enables us to feel connected rather than completely insignificant on these incredible timescales, where we recognize our role as a as a universal whole, as a we recognize we have a role to play in life or living systems, that our actions are not without consequence. Do you, in your work, do you reference other thought paradigms like that, like cultural paradigms like everywhen in, say, a Starship or an Icarus Interstellar project, as a way to jolt engineers and scientists into stepping outside of perhaps a linear thought pathway to try and solve challenges or questions?
Yeah, I think that the 50,000 year long story, Aboriginal story of the everyone.
Yeah.
We've begun a tradition in Australia. It began that when we have meetings, international meetings on building something that we call the Square Kilometre Array, the world's next big, very large radio telescope, we have begun to hold art programs, to have local art, Aboriginal art, or native art from wherever we're meeting, be part of that scientific experience, so that we do build a broader culture, and we get to see how other individuals, other native cultures view the sky and how they incorporate it into their own story. So I think, it's, in addition to being very beautiful, it's also been a lot of fun to see this happen.
Brilliant, brilliant. And do you, this is a point that has come up through a number of different panels over the last 2 days, has been the poetic or metaphoric connection between the ocean and the cosmos. Is that something that is helpful in your work, in particular for understanding and detecting life, for example?
Well, what it helps us do is think about life as we do not yet know it, right? Thinking about we co-evolved with this planet. So we have changed the planet has certainly profoundly changed us. And that idea of coevolution and the fact that somewhere else that evolution will have gone in a different way is something that we try and keep in mind, so that we don't rule out opportunities for detecting life as we don't yet know it. So we've used the term SETI for 60 years. We've now begun to try and talk about biosignatures and technosignatures as things that we might find that would be indicative of biology and technology that are other than our own.
And what is your instinct in terms of a response? I know you would be the first person many people would call up if there was ever such a discovery. What would your answer be in that instance? Jill, we have found a particular signature that may have agency, for example.
Well, the first thing is prove it, right? Let's make sure that what you found is what you think you've found.
Yes.
So you try and get independent confirmation using some other tools, looking at it in some other way. And then, of course, you tell the world, because that information is not the property of the researchers who discovered it. It's not the property of California or the United States, or it's the property of humankind. And that information should be shared. And I think that we don't have, now that we've been talking for so long about the potential of life beyond Earth, I don't really think that the opportunity, as often was said in the past, of panic and scaring people and, everybody just going ape, I don't think that's there. Because of the kinds of things that you're doing here, we're opening up people's minds to the possibility. And the more we talk about it, the less likely it is to be disconcerting if it's found.
Yes. Yes. And you've given your big call to action. In a sense, you've given us a perspective that we need to hear and reflect on, not just for the next 50 years, but for the length of time as our species, I would imagine. This is a huge call to action. Is there any...
We want to try and make sure that life on this planet has a long future.
Yes, yes, and not just human life. Yes,
right.
It's co-mingling. So, if you have, I'm assuming you have a very interdisciplinary perspective, and that is something that we could build on and aspire to. So if you've got young astronomers who are stepping into asking questions like this, you have physicists, you have engineers, you have artists, you have people coming together who want to understand, they want to make a contribution to the broader knowledge of and to answer questions, to search for life, to understand our place in the universe and how we can be better humans. What sort of career pathway do you suggest for them? What steps can they take?
Well, I think science and math are good tools for logical thinking. But I usually tell people, find something that you really like to do, something that gives you joy, and then get better at it than anybody else. Put in the work, the study, whatever's required to become really skilled, and then figure out what you can do, the tools that you have, how that can be used to answer questions that are of interest to you. And don't just say, well, I studied biochemistry, and so I'm going to think only about life as a biological thing. Think about how your skills in biochemistry might be able to guide the construction of a new instrument to look at the universe in a new way. How could we investigate the cryovolcanoes that are erupting from the south pole of the Enceladus moon? How can we figure out whether the liquid ocean that's underneath the icy crust of that moon contains something that might relate to life or something that might relate to technology? And we're all going to be doing, not me, I'm too old. Young people are going to be doing many different careers, I think, in their life spans. And they just ought to be flexible and figure out what question they want to answer, and then, as we've already heard, go back to school or take up a new bit of training to figure out how you can try and answer that question.
Pursue it relentlessly, regardless of the toolkit. Yes. We've had a live comment, and people have congratulated you and thanked you for your wise and inspiring words. And one of the messages came through from one of the aquanauts from Tektite II Mission 6, Alina Sismanta, and she said the concept of Earthling should include the value of all species, not just humans, was her point. And it reminds me of something that came up, and that was a question that I'll pose to you now. With your consideration of life and the potential for life, do you think we may come to an understanding where we will recognize that the ocean itself or herself has sentient status? The ocean is life, a living form with agency, with memory.
I think actually you have to be broader than just the ocean. I think you need to include the whole biosphere. And yeah, I mean, that's a hypothesis, the Gaia hypothesis, that might in fact someday in some way prove out to be correct because of the incredible interrelated regulation that goes on in the planet, and how that evolves. It's I like the idea. I don't know that we can ask the question without anthropomorphizing it too much.
Mm. Mm. And your point would be to prove it first.
Yes. Well, understand it, right? So you can help it work better. Stop messing it up.
Yes. Well, brilliant, great words. And thank you so much, Jill, for your closing words, your inspiring words, your call to action, and all that you are doing. We really value your broader contribution to exploration in general and inspiring many, many people. So thank you for joining us. And I believe we are going to move now into some messages in a bottle, some people who have sent in their thanks and support for the Tektite Women of Sea and Space.
Hello, I'm Felicity Aston, and I've been really fortunate in my life to make some extraordinary journeys in some of the world's coldest places. And I'm incredibly thankful that many of those journeys have been made with all-female teams. For example, in 2009, I skied to the South Pole with a team of women from across the Commonwealth. So that included countries like Jamaica, Ghana, Brunei Darussalam, Singapore, India. And then in 2019, I skied to the North Pole with a team of women from across the Middle East and Europe. So that included women from countries like Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait, as well as Slovenia, Sweden, France, Russia and the UK. And I still get asked from time to time why it's important to me to complete projects with all-female crews. And my answer is because people are still surprised by these stories, are still interested. One day, hopefully in my lifetime, people won't be interested anymore. And that's when we'll know that the focus is as it should be, on the individual, not on the stereotype. Until then, huge thanks to the Tektite II Mission 6 crew. We're all still following in your wake. Thanks from up here in Northwest Iceland.
I am Kavinia Francis.
I'm Samari Manuel.
I'm Elvira Bell.
I'm Crystal Clashing.
And we are Team Antigua Island Girls. On January 28, 2019, we became the first all-black team and the first all-female team from the Caribbean to row across any ocean.
For 47 days, 8 hours, 25 minutes, we rowed over 3,000 miles from the Canary Islands, just off the coast of Africa, back to our homeland of Antigua and Barbuda.
We recognized that being Caribbean women in the male-dominated activity of ocean rowing meant that we were breaking cultural barriers.
Barriers not unlike the first all-female team of Tektite II to live and explore on the water for 2 weeks back in 1970.
So we encourage and say thank you to women before and after us who braved the unknown in any domain, from the depths of our ocean to the remits of outer space.
Let us, as women, continue to inspire future generations to do the unlikely and seemingly impossible. Happy anniversary!
Hi, I'm Kevin Hardy from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. The Tektite II project involved hundreds of people, certainly the Aquanauts, but also the visionaries, the designers, the builders, the topside crews, the support divers, the funding agencies. We also want to thank the photographers and filmmakers, storytellers, the ones who brought this story alive for so many that couldn't be there. To the many crew that dove the site, we thank you also. It is still the stuff of science fiction.
Hey everybody, I'm Allison Levine, and I was the team captain of the first American Women's Everest expedition and was the first North American woman to complete what's known as the Adventure Grand Slam, which is climbing the highest peak on all 7 continents, the 7 summits, and then skiing to both the North and the South Poles. And I learned so many incredible lessons in these remote extreme environments and feel so fortunate to have had these incredible experiences. And I learned more than I could learn in any traditional indoor classroom. And I think the best lesson I learned in the mountains, and this is one I hope you will all remember too, is that when you're climbing a big peak, you don't have to be the best, fastest, strongest climber. You just have to be the most relentless about putting one foot in front of the other. So keep climbing, everybody. I'm cheering for you.
Well, thank you for those messages in a bottle. They are absolutely phenomenal. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Sylvia. Hi, Sylvia.
Good to you.
For our Tektite 2020 Women in Sea and Space. As we celebrate Tektite II Mission 6 that you led 50 years ago this month with your fearless team of Aquanauts, Alina, Peggy, and Renata. That mission set you on a path to another monumental mission, that of sharing and encouraging humanity to recognize our debt of gratitude to the ocean, the life it holds, and to protect it. For so many of us, you have been the ultimate inspiration and role model as a scientist, as an explorer, a conservationist, a passionate advocate for the non-human world, from the seaweeds to the shrimp, crabs, octopus, tuna, sharks, nudibranchs, turtles, whales, everything in between. One of my favorite names for you is the U.S. Sturgeon General. I distinctly remember meeting you for the first time, Sylvia, at your house in 1989 on my birthday, New Year's Eve. What a birthday gift that was. You and Graham Hawkes were gathering volunteers to build this revolutionary submarine, the Deep Flight. And it was a vehicle that would fly underwater and do barrel rolls with the whales. I jumped at that opportunity to work with you, and along with fellow volunteer Brett Hobson, who I would later marry. So another pivotal part of my life. You helped me launch to my career, my graduate school career at your alma mater at Duke, and have continued to play a huge role as a mentor in my life. Now, the Deep Flight project was just one of many. You created additional underwater robotic businesses with your daughter, Liz, one of your 3 children. You became the first chief scientist of NOAA, a National Geographic explorer in residence, authored hundreds of scientific papers, more than a dozen books, the recipient of the Carl Sagan Award for Public Understanding, a nice tie-in there with space, a member of the National Women's Hall of Fame, Library Congress Living Legend. You've received the coveted TED Prize, founded the nonprofit Mission Blue Foundation, which has created more than 120 hope spots in an effort to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030. And you're a recent grandma as well. And you've just started the Deep Hope Project. And I think in truth, you are just getting started.
Yes.
And so Sylvia, as a dear lifelong friend, someone who's been so pivotal in my own personal life, we are so pleased to give you the floor to deliver our closing remarks for our amazing 2-day celebration of Tektite 2020, Women of Sea and Space. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Tierney. I am so pleased to come after the messages in the bottle and the message before that with Jill Tarter. We appeared together on the TED stage in 2009. We both were awarded a TED Prize to make a wish big enough to change the world. I followed Jill, so I had a chance to pose a question to her and to the audience. In her search for life elsewhere in the universe, had she succeeded in finding intelligent life here on Earth? Well, I think there's evidence that there's plenty of intelligence just in the last day or so, listening to the voices speaking for high in the sky and deep in the sea. Mindful that Jane Lipchenko opened this conference with a big thought, and that is that the ocean is not too big to fail. I used those same words in 2012 at a conference in Rio Plus 20. The headline for that meeting of minds around the world was, what is the future we want? What is the future we want? We have a choice. As never before, maybe as never again, we have choices that will shape whatever the future will be. It really is up to the decisions we make. So climate scientists say the next 10 years will make it or break it as far as making the decisions that will take us to a safe place or a place that is really pretty terrible for the future of humankind. Well, I've been saying for about 30 years the next 10 years will be the most important in the next 10,000, and it continues to be true. It's just that it gets harder to make progress toward that future that we want. Part of it is because of complacency. We take Earth for granted. Those of you who watched Jill's presentation about where in the cosmos we are, this tiny blue speck. I mean, I heard Jill just say it takes a cosmos to make a human. Well, it takes a cosmos to make a starfish or a tuna fish or a microbe. I heard Carl Sagan once say that if you want to make an apple pie, you first have to invent the universe. Everything starts from somewhere. And where did it all start for us? Well, stardust. Again, Carl Sagan. We're all made of stardust. And here we are. We should begin every day with something that reminds us of where we've come from, where we are, and mostly, okay, so where do we want to go? We have, as never before, knowledge that didn't exist, could not exist 50 years ago. Imagine, when I was a kid, no one had seen Earth from space, but 10-year-olds of today grow up with that awareness. That's a head start toward building the future that we want, knowing something about who we are in the greater scheme of things. We are now not only connected with a virus that we're just a piece of meat to these tiny little creatures that are not out to get us deliberately. They're not willfully trying to destroy humankind. They're just doing their thing. It's just nature in action. Most viruses, well, we need them. They're part of what makes Earth function. And bacteria, we need them too. They make Earth what Earth is. We should be grateful to all those microbes and grateful that we have the knowledge that we now know that didn't exist not just 50 years ago, but any time in the past. I mean, smallpox was a plague for thousands of years, mostly during a time when people didn't have any understanding about what was causing it or how to deal with it. At least we're armed with knowledge that gives us a chance to go forward and cope with these things and other matters. So what is the future that we want? When I think about looking at the past as a way to understand the future. Zahi Hawass, my fellow explorer in residence at the National Geographic, he is the director of pyramids. He said, "You cannot know your future if you do not know your past." So here we are, reflecting on the deep past of the cosmos, reflecting on the near past, just a few decades ago, what we did not know that we now know that can arm us going forward. So I personally can look back as a scientist using scuba even before 50 years ago, even before Tektite. It was thought that if scientists were using scuba, you're having too much fun to be taken seriously. Well, I think we're past that so much good science has come by actually being in the ocean. I mean, people camp in the forests. Nobody questions that. Jane Goodall spent 15 years living in the environment that she was aspiring to get to know the animals, one in particular, chimpanzees, that have helped us get to know that other animal, human beings, better than we otherwise could. But our time underwater is measured not in years. I mean, cumulative, yes, but in terms of long periods the gift of time to really get to know the creatures, to get to know the environment, to track it over a period of meaningful change. And 15 years is a good start toward that. And Jane's exceptional depth of understanding, not only of the animals that she was studying, but of the environment within which they prospered, and getting to know their personalities, getting to know their family structure. We're just beginning to do that with whales, because getting to where they are, tracking individuals, getting to see their faces, getting to see their personality, getting to know their language, getting to know their culture, it's happening now. 50 years ago, for the most part, whales were regarded as pieces of meat, barrels of oil. We're still looking at fish that way. That will change too. It has to, as we get to know fish as individuals, to know their personality, know their language, know their social structure, know their importance, not just to the ocean, but how that all relates back to us. So the highest and best use of fish in the sea is not delicious on our plate, but alive in the ocean as a part of the system that keeps us alive. So now we know what we could not know when I was a kid or a young scientist. I had the chance to use scuba as a part of expeditions around the world, aboard the research vessel Anton Brunn in the 1960s, 64, 65, the Indian Ocean, in the Pacific, the Eastern Tropical Pacific, Galapagos Islands. It was so different in 1966 than when I first saw what was there than it is today. Remarkably, much of it is still intact, but what has been lost, I, as a witness, have that as a part of what I know that I want to share with others, with the evidence that comes from having seen and personally witnessed underwater, not just looking at the surface. We've spent centuries doing that. This is the first time that we're able to go high in the sky and deep in the sea and bring back evidence of what's actually there as witnesses. Oh, I love robots. I love it that we can send a robot to Mars. I love it that we can send robots to the deepest ocean, but there's no substitute for sending a human being. Robots, they don't have a sense of humor, for one thing, but they also can't tell stories. They don't have that knowledge base. They can be witnesses with photographs, and so can we, but we can do more. We need the robots. They don't get tired. They do break down. Humans do too, sometimes. But we need all the tools. We certainly need to be humans underwater, humans in space, with everything that we've got to do what it takes at this amazing point in time. Building on the past experience, but looking to the future. What is the future we want? Well, first of all, it'd be great to have clean air, clean water, diversity, a planet that works in our favor. That's our challenge. It really is. So, as a scientist committed to exploring the ocean from the inside out, when I had a chance to respond to that little notice on the bulletin board at Harvard University asking, how would you like to spend 2 weeks underwater? You have to submit a project. It has to be accepted. But if you're accepted, we might accept you to be an aquanaut. I know that there's been so much talk in the last couple of days about Mission 6, the women's team that really, I think, helped bring attention to this wonderful scientific project, took it outside of the science and brought it into a different way of looking at things, because the idea of women living underwater just caught the public's imagination. And I'm sure you know from previous talks that we were aquanauts, of course, so were the guys, but none of the guys were called aquahunks. None of them were called aquanauties. We were. I don't know who came up with that, but anyway, We didn't care what we were called, just so we got to go. And we did. At the time, there was so much enthusiasm for exploring space, for the technology that for the first time made the idea of living in space a reality. It was Skylab, and then the idea that there could be a space station, and the International Space Station became a reality. When I look back about what the expectations were for space exploration in 1970, and where we've come, how much we've achieved, how much has been achieved, I think in so many ways, the dreams have been exceeded. You know, there's some that have not been fulfilled, but mainly we've gone beyond what we were hoping could be achieved at that time. Well, the International Space Station is certainly one. Having telescopes lofted up there in space so that we could look further and better than we can from a position here on Earth. Having robots crawling around on Mars and dreaming of maybe sending humans there someday. Looking to explore the oceans of places beyond the one we have here. That has not actually been fulfilled yet, but at least gazillions of dollars are being invested in exploring the moon of Jupiter, Europa. I mean, I don't know how much a gazillion is, but more than is being committed to exploring this ocean here on Earth. So why is this difference? Why can't we inspire the same level of enthusiasm for exploring this planet, this ocean, that we have for looking at the world beyond? I put that question to Claire Booth Luce. We were having lunch together in her lovely home in Hawaii. Claire Booth Luce was an American playwright, a stateswoman, just a big thinker. And she paused for a moment before looking up at the sky where those big puffy white clouds were drifting by. And she said, you know, I think it's simple, my dear. Heaven is up that way. And you know what's in the other direction. Maybe there is something to that. But for some of us, we know heaven is down there. It's the ocean. Oh, well, it's everywhere. It's the whole universe. It's having the capability as humans to imagine in ways that as smart as other animals are on Earth, and as much as we love and respect elephants, dolphins, whales, they cannot go in spacecraft beyond where they live. They haven't mastered the technology that humans have to be able to see beyond the environment where we originated. We are blessed with that power to go beyond. And we need that power. We need the superpower that we all have. We just have to use it right now in ways that we couldn't imagine before, that we needed to. So, what about the ocean? What did we expect we might be doing from that perspective 50 years ago? Well, we imagined that people would be living underwater. And in fact, for a while, as you know from that volume that was produced by Jim Miller and Jan Koblik, there were more than 50 little underwater laboratories that were generated. Tektite came along at this time of yeah, we can do this. Let's go. Let's see the ocean from the inside out. There followed a project that NOAA really sponsored, living in the hydrolab and using the Johnson Sea Link submarine as a taxi cab. We were saturated, some of us were, during this project called SCORE for several missions. Saturated aquanauts went under pressure, saturated, into a chamber in the aft section of the Johnson Sea Link, closed the hatch, went out to 250 feet over the edge of the drop-off, swam out of the submarine, I spent almost an hour at 250 feet. From the surface, I would have maybe 5 minutes on a long decompression to get back to the surface. By going back into the submarine and then going back to a saturation home, the hydrolab, we could decompress partly on the way, but then back to a level not at the surface, but 50 feet below the surface. So, you know, innovative approaches to ocean exploration in the 70s that followed Tektite, they kind of evaporated, at least in this country. We've lost the National Underwater Research Program. How many underwater laboratories are there today? Well, there's the Underwater Hotel, Jan Koblik, that is there, the Jules Underwater Hotel in Key Largo, and just offshore, Aquarius. Other nations along the way have taken up the idea, and certainly industry has taken up the idea of saturation diving and still uses it effectively for commercial purposes, but to drive the cutting edge of exploration, of science, of knowledge. There are some intrepid individuals, well, my heroes, my champions, who are using the rebreather technology that really began underwater, is now being used in space. That's what astronauts have on their backs when they go outside of their safe haven in space. Rebreathers, used now by intrepid scientists to go deeper and stay longer, saturating their tissues, long decompressions, not with underwater laboratories, in water saturation. You really have to be tough and willing to subject yourself to these long decompressions. Bill Stone is one of the heroes of aerospace and ocean space, using cutting edge technologies, using his own mighty mind to figure out tables for mixed gases to prolong exploration, not just deep in the sea, but into caves, into the artery system, into the rivers and that underpin the land, that bring us fresh water, going deep, long saturations. I mean, it's amazing what Bill Stone and some of his colleagues have done over the years. I think about how Richard Pyle and his pals at the University of Hawaii are going deep. Richard says that he finds as many as 13 new species of fish per hour when he gets down to 100 meters beneath the surface. It is so little known, and the life there is so abundant. How much else is there that we don't know, because we can't get where Richard Pyle goes? And that's only 100 meters. Think about the great depths of the ocean beyond. But even within that twilight zone, where Jill Heinrich goes into the caves and goes under the ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic. Wes Skiles, one of the great heroes, Kenny Broad, Tom Mount. I think about the dozens of individuals, and there's a project currently underway. It's a 10-year project that's underway with Emmanuel and Ghislaine Bardot, who have a portable underwater, call it a habitat, if you will. It's a capsule. Doesn't have much that's fancy in terms of living, but for 72 hours, and they do breathe mixed gas, but they have gone under the North Pole. They're right now exploring the tropical Pacific in parts that, again, we've only been where scuba divers can go, but to go to French Polynesia, how about 100 meters? How about staying for 72 hours? How about catching a little glimpse of the kind of gift that you get with time that the big explorers on the land, whether it's George Schaller studying the pandas or snow leopards, trying to see them anyway, or, of course, Jane Goodall with chimpanzees. We take that for granted on the land. What about getting down into the ocean for extended periods of time? Why can't we capture that again? We're still so far behind the levels of investment that have taken us high in the sky with dividends that have paid off mightily. We've neglected the ocean, and it's costing us dearly not to know what we need to know right now. My dreams, some of them have become reality. Others are still out there. My dream, going back, well, you know, Tierney Tees, because you shared that dream of building glass submarines glass is a great substance that gets stronger with increased pressure. I salute those who have gone to the ultimate depths in the ocean. I mean, come on, to go down 11 kilometers. 1960, before there were footprints on the moon, there was Don Walsh and Jacques Picard in the deepest part of the ocean for half an hour, looking through a little porthole, and then zoom forward to 2012 with a submersible that he helped design and build himself. Jim Cameron, full ocean depth, spent hours on the bottom, looking, recording, sampling, imaging, and not just at that depth, but in the trials going up to it, going down to, deep water for meaningful periods of time. And then just last year, to see Victor Vesolo coming along with the ability to use submersible technology, again, with little ports, but going to the deepest part of the sea, not just once, but repeatedly, over and over, and taking along with him just recently, one of my heroes, Kathy Sullivan, the first woman to do a spacewalk. I mean, we celebrate the all-women spacewalk, but Kathy was the first woman to actually do it. And she called me when she was being tapped for the possibility of going, because NASA had refused to have her make a spacewalk initially, thinking that women are more susceptible to decompression than men, that they'd have problems that men would not. Well, she called me because of my experience with Tektite. Is it true? Or do you have any evidence? Where's the evidence? I gave her contact with a doctor who was the U.S. Navy's Man of the Year in 1970, Surgeon Vice Admiral Sir John Rawlings, who could confirm that it is not a problem. There was a very modest difference in pressure from inside the space capsule that where Kathy was and going outside, but it was just enough to have somebody say, well, women are different. Yeah, women are different, but not in the ways that would keep us from doing what guys can do in space or in underwater. So, myth dispelled. I hope that it won't take 50 years to master the fine art of using glass for spheres to take people to full ocean depth, the way we can now go to 1,000 meters and a bit more in a clear sphere. So you have visibility, you have the ability to add instruments, you can have batteries. We shouldn't have to wait 50 years to have batteries that require the equivalent of the unobtainium that is featured in Avatar. We shouldn't have to tear up the earth, destroy the deep sea to get the materials to build better batteries. We just can do better than this. I am confident that in 50 years we will have figured it out. We have to hurry to master the technologies that we need to go from where we are, polluting the atmosphere, warming the planet with fossil fuels that now we know. 50 years ago, it seemed like a great idea to continue extracting oil, gas, coal to power our technologies that have taken us to space, that make communications possible, that have done so much for our health and our well-being. But the biggest gift of those fossil fuels is knowing we have to change. And now is the time to really go flat out, using our mighty superpowers of knowing, to turn from what we have witnessed, what we have caused in recent decades, to go to this better time. What is the future we want? We know it's possible. We know it's within our grasp. But first, we have to get over the complacency. First, we have to get over those habits that we know we don't need. We don't need to consume large quantities of ocean wildlife. We can get by with consuming far less of those wild creatures. We don't eat songbirds anymore, for the most part, a few, but not too many. It's a carbon cycle thing. We need to understand how the chemistry of the planet relates to ocean wildlife, relates to trees on the land, relates to all life, the diversity of life, including ourselves. But we're the ones who have the power to make the decisions of restraint, protecting the natural world that has taken 4.5 billion years. We'll go back to the beginning of the cosmos. That's our origin, that we have to think about that context. Here we are, as never before. We know what to do. As never again, we've got a chance to do it. What are we waiting for? Well, I'm still waiting for the funding. Not waiting, trying very hard to raise the funding to get little submarines, working with my daughter, working with DOER, working with a foundation, Deep Hope, to build little submarines to democratize access to the sea, to go deeper than divers can go, to get that gift of time. Clear, not glass yet, but someday, I hope soon, to go to full ocean depth. But right now, why not to at least 1,000 meters with technology that's tried and true? I love it that there are little submarines out there for passengers, for tourism. We need to get people to be familiar with the ocean, to know the ocean, not just the little surface, not just to 100 meters, not just to 1,000 meters. We need to understand the depths of the ocean, that the ocean is alive from the top to the bottom, and it keeps us alive. Now we have to keep the ocean alive, not by consciously doing something except take off the pressure. Take what we're doing that we know is harming the ocean, the bad things we're putting into the ocean, the good things we're taking out of the ocean. We need to understand that we have the power to protect the ocean. So, 50 years from now, we can look back on this time when we have been witnesses to seeing half the coral reefs disappear, 90% of many of the big fish, the bluefin tuna in the Pacific, according to the best numbers from the fishermen and the scientists together, less than 3% remaining since 50 years ago. The oceanic white-tip sharks, maybe 1% of them remain, some from 50 years ago, because of us, because of what we've been taking out of the ocean for luxury consumption, shark fin soup, shark steak, or whatever. We have the power of restraint. We can say, we're not going to eat shark fins anymore. We're not going to kill the tuna anymore. We're just going to let the ocean have them, not on our plate. We need to release our superpowers, the power of knowing. I suppose that whales realize the planet has changed in their lifetime. Fewer squid, fewer fish. The ocean is not as friendly as it was. It's a noisier place, among other things, because of what humans have put into the ocean. Noise. Oh, incredible. We didn't think about that 50 years ago, but now we know. We can embrace what remains of healthy places. There are organizations around the world. The organization that I started as a consequence of the wish I was granted by the TEDsters with the TED Prize, Mission Blue, a wish big enough to save the world, at least to help in that direction. We've enlisted more than 200 partners around the world. Many of them are committed to identifying critical places, embracing them with care. Nature Conservancy does this, Land and Sea. World Wildlife Fund does this, Land and Sea. Conservation International. I used to be, and still am, involved with Conservation International, trying to identify critical areas, protect them with everything we've got. Mission Blue has inspired people around the world to nominate places we call hope spots. Not all of them are in great shape, like San Francisco Bay. Plenty of reason for some action there to take it from where it is to get to a better place. but other places like Palau, already in pretty good condition. And working with the people, and certainly working with the government, with Tommy Vermingasau, an inspired leader, to protect, in their case, 80% of their entire exclusive economic zone, where even the tuna, even the swordfish, even the lobsters are safe. The rest, it's open for some use, but, it's just under a regime of respect and care. Just in the Seychelles, that was my most recent time away from my safe haven here in Oakland, California, meeting with the president of the Seychelles, where they too are stepping up with broad protection for their exclusive economic zone, with safe havens for all the creatures who live there. Safer for fish means safer for people. That's the thing. We are working with as many individuals and communities around the world as possible to inspire a sense of hope, to look at what the future that we really want, that we need, if we are to have a safe haven for ourselves in a universe of really unfriendly places. We might set up housekeeping on the moon, or Mars, or even beyond our own solar system someday, but only if we make peace with nature here on Earth. We can't dream big. We could not have a project like Tektite if we were in the midst of a world war. We could not have a project such as what Jill has described, of seeking answers for, is anybody else out there in the universe? Is there life beyond our own solar system, even within our solar system beyond Earth? These are important questions to the future of our species. But if we are so committed, so distracted by just staying alive, because we have consumed the natural world to the point where we're at war with one another, then we will fail to have the future that we want. Our highest priority as a species must be to take care of the systems, Earth systems, that make our existence possible. It's almost as if we have been commanded to do exactly the opposite, to consume, to take down, change the Earth so that it's not hospitable for us to be creative, for us to be thoughtful about the big future that we all expect to have, at least the one that we dream about, not just for us in our lifetime, of course, but like all generations of humans. What sets us apart from so many other forms of life is caring about the next generation, that social habit of learning and then taking what we know and passing it along, learning and then passing it along. So every generation is gifted with what we've learned from the past generation. There are stops and, just sometimes we really sweep forward with amazing speed, and never more so than in the last 50 years. We've learned more about who we are, where we've come from, where we might be going in the last 50 years than during all preceding history, I think it's safe to say. But at the same time, we've lost more. The speed of destruction has paralleled the speed of knowing. We are at a crossroads. If we are to succeed, we have to take what we now know, get the laws that were built 50, 100, the customs that may go back 1,000 years about consuming from nature, thinking that the ocean, nature, is too big to fail. No, it isn't. And no, we're not either. We have the power to either go from where we are to get to this much better place, or lose the chance. Looking through the eyes of a child, we cannot lose that chance. This, as never before, is a time for hope. It's a time for action. It's a time to use our mighty powers to look at the ocean, to look at all of nature, to say, we have to protect this. We have to protect what we've got and do better than we have been doing, as if our lives depend on it, because they do. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for being a part of this amazing celebration of times past. Can't wait to see Tierney and all the rest of you who've put this amazing conference together. Let's do it again. I'm in. You are too. I know you are.
So emotional right now. I think you sum up so beautifully everything that we need to hear. It's very clear your practical advice. It's very clear your call to action. It's very clear that you still have hope. And I think you're calling for us to take a deep dive into the cerebral seas inside of our heads, into our hearts, into our blue hearts, and ask the question, what kind of species are we? What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind? And I think that it's very clear the steps we need to take from what you're saying to leave a legacy behind that we're proud of. I'd like to invite onto this the conversation with us, just to thank you wholeheartedly for being part of this celebratory event, for laying the foundation, the reason for our celebration, the 50 years ago, leading the team of Aquanauts in that crazy mission that was so inspirational and such a launch pad for what a career all of you have had, and the mission that it set you off on. That's now more important than ever before. So just immense heartfelt thanks to you, Sylvia, and to everyone who participated in this conference, and my co-conspirator on all of this, Sarah Jane Pell, taking on the lion's share of work to make this happen. We, yes, just an impossible thing to pull off in the amount of time that we gave ourselves. So I'm just so humbled and so honored to be part of this event. And Sylvia, your words just stirred me to the very salt water in every one of my cells.
It is so true. They said that it took 500 people for the Tektite mission, representing 50 organizations. We had 50 speakers to come together within about 3 weeks. And I can honestly say, I think their hearts and stories were extended to you with for all of your superpowers and the hope and the generosity that you give in this important message. But it's like it's 3.6 billion Earthlings who need to hear this, and it's an honor for us to work on a small platform that might enable this conversation to go further and to be distributed. So thank you. I was a bit teary myself. Your words are just so poignant and so important.
And such a message we need to hear and get through. So
thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia.
And also, can we say thank you to Joe, if he could come on, Joe Grabowski, who's also assisted us, and their speakers.
There you are, Joe. Yes. Couldn't have done it without pulling all the strings behind the scenes.
Thank you, Sylvia. That was absolutely amazing. And Sarah and Tierney, what you did in 3 weeks is incredible. So thanks for letting me be a small part of it. It was amazing.
Thanks, Joe.
And just a huge heartfelt thanks to everyone, everyone who spoke, everyone who helped out, and to all the work that's going on. We are invigorated. This has been a shot of adrenaline for all of us involved. The synergies, the cooperation, the energy. I think we have our work cut out for us, and we are energized to get the job done. So thank you, everyone.
It's strange. I don't want this to end. I think our broadcast cuts off in 15 seconds, but it doesn't end, and that's the point. We continue on.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Onward and downward.
Onward.
Onward and downward. That is heaven.
And all of us together.
Brilliant. Oh, we have 20 seconds.